Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Documentary Man. Calvin Payne had learned to read people during his 8 years in military intelligence. Body language, micro-expressions, the tiny hesitations before a lie. They were his native language. So when his wife Brittany started touching her left earring every time she spoke to him, he knew something had shifted. The irony wasn't lost on him. He left the army at 29, tired of hunting threats in foreign countries, wanting to build something meaningful. Documentary filmmaking seemed like the perfect transition, still investigating, still uncovering truths, but without the body bags. His work had gained critical acclaim. 3 films exposing corruption in various industries, each one meticulously researched and devastatingly effective. That's how he'd met Brittany Thornton 5 years ago. She'd approached him at a gallery opening in Manhattan, all glossy black hair and practiced charm, praising his latest documentary about pharmaceutical fraud. "You have a gift for revealing what people hide," she'd said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. He'd missed that detail then, too dazzled by her beauty and apparent interest. The Thornton family owned Thornton Industries, a sprawling empire built on real estate, pharmaceuticals, and what they called international logistics. Calvin had done basic research before proposing, nothing deeper than any reasonable person would do. The Thorntons were wealthy, influential, with the kind of pristine public image that came from expensive PR firms and generous donations to museums and hospitals. He should have looked harder. Now, sitting in the breakfast room of the Thornton estate in Westchester County, Calvin watched his 3-year-old daughter Emma push Cheerios around her bowl, making motor sounds. Her dark curls, inherited from Brittany, bounced as she moved. Everything good in his life was sitting across from him in pink pajamas. "Daddy, airplane." Emma held up a piece of cereal. "That's right, sweetheart. Want to hear a secret?" Calvin leaned inconspiratorially. "Tomorrow, we're going on a real airplane ride. A helicopter, actually." Emma's eyes went huge. "Really? Really? Grandpa Anthony wants to show us his new helicopter." Calvin kept his voice light, though his instincts screamed warnings he couldn't yet decipher. Brittany walked in, phone pressed to her ear, already dressed in a cream Chanel suit despite the early hour. She glanced at Emma, then Calvin, her expression as warm as marble. "I have to go into the city. Mother wants me there for the charity luncheon." "I thought we were spending the day together," Calvin said mildly. "Plans change, Calvin." She touched her left earring. "You understand." He understood plenty. Over the past 6 months, Brittany had grown distant, cold. She'd moved into a separate bedroom, claiming Emma's nighttime crying disturbed her sleep. She'd started taking calls that made her leave the room. She'd look at Calvin sometimes with something approaching contempt, quickly masked when she remembered to play the role. Most telling, she'd updated her life insurance and asked Calvin to do the same, increasing his policy to $5 million with her as the sole beneficiary. When he questioned it, she'd laughed. "We have a child, Calvin. These things matter." His intelligence background had taught him to document everything. For 3 months, he'd been quietly collecting evidence of something. Brittany's late-night phone calls, her father Annie's frequent business trips to Colombia and Myanmar, the way the family's pharmaceutical division shipped products through routes that made no economic sense, the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. And then, 2 weeks ago, the real breakthrough, a flash drive left carelessly in Anthony's study. Calvin had been looking for a book, found something far more valuable. Financial records, shipping manifests, codenames and routes. The Thornton family wasn't just in pharmaceuticals. They were moving something else entirely, using their legitimate business as cover. Calvin had made copies, encrypted them, sent them to 3 different secure locations. Because that's what intelligence training taught you. Always have insurance, always have an exit strategy. "Enjoy your luncheon," Calvin told Brittany, kissing Emma's head. "We'll be here when you get back." Brittany's eyes flicked to him, sharp and assessing. "Actually, I'll be back tomorrow morning. The helicopter tour is scheduled for 10 a.m. Don't be late." After she left, Calvin sat in silence, listening to Emma's airplane sounds. His phone buzzed, A text from Marcus Hood, his old Army intelligence partner, who transitioned to private security work. Marcus, you still want to go through with this? Calvin, tomorrow. Stick to the plan. Marcus, roger that. Watch your six, brother. Calvin pocketed the phone and smiled at his daughter. Come on, Emma Bear. Let's go to the park. As they left the Thornton estate, Calvin didn't look back at the mansion looming behind them. By this time tomorrow, everything would be different. Either he'd be free with his daughter, or they'd both be dead. He was betting everything on option 1. Chapter 2. The Family Business. That evening, Calvin received a summons to Anthony Thornton's private study, a wood-paneled sanctum where the patriarch conducted his real business. Calvin had been in this room exactly 3 times during his 5-year marriage. Each visit had been brief, uncomfortable, making it clear he was an outsider tolerating on the family sufferance. Anthony sat behind a massive desk, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit custom-tailored to hide the beginning of a paunch. At 68, he carried himself like a man who'd never heard the word no and didn't intend to start. Kimberly Thornton, Brittany's mother, stood by the window, her thin frame draped in designer silk. She had the same cold beauty as her daughter, but aged into something brittle and sharp. Calvin, sit. Anthony gestured to the chair facing his desk, the supplicant's position. Calvin sat, keeping his posture relaxed, his face neutral. What's this about? Tomorrow's flight, Anthony said, pressing his fingertips together. I wanted to discuss something with you privately. Man to man. I'm listening. You've been married to my daughter for 5 years. In that time, you've continued your documentary work, your investigations. Anthony's smile didn't waver. Admirable, in its way. You have principles. Thank you. However, Kimberly interjected, her voice like ice water. Principles can be inconvenient, particularly when they lead a man to look into matters that don't concern him. Calvin's pulse quickened, but his expression remained unchanged. I'm not sure what you mean. Don't insult us. Anthony's smile vanished. 2 weeks ago, someone accessed my computer. Files were copied. I know it was you, Calvin. You're the only one with both the skills and the stupidity to try. Strong accusations require strong evidence. When not in court, Anthony leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, during our helicopter tour, you're going to give me the locations of every copy of those files. You're going to provide all passwords, all access codes, and then you're going to sign a contract agreeing never to speak of what you saw. And if I refuse? Kimberly laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Then Emma grows up without a father. Accidents happen, Calvin, particularly around helicopters. The threat hung in the air between them. Calvin processed it, his mind racing through scenarios. They'd just confirmed everything he'd suspected. They were willing to kill him. They'd use the helicopter. I need time to think, Calvin said carefully. You have until tomorrow morning. Anthony stood, signaling the conversation was over. 10 a.m., Calvin. Don't disappoint us. You wouldn't want Emma to lose both parents. The words sent ice through Calvin's veins. What does that mean? It means, Brittany said, entering the study from a side door. How long had she been listening? That I'm tired of this charade. I married you because father needed someone clean, someone respectable, to polish the family image. The war hero turned documentarian, fighting for truth and justice. She laughed bitterly. You were perfect cover, but you become a liability. Calvin looked at his wife, really looked at her. You never loved me. Love. Brittany's expression was pure contempt. You were a tool, Calvin, a useful idiot. And now you're just an idiot who knows too much. And Emma. For just a moment, something flickered in Brittany's eyes. Then it was gone. Emma is a Thornton. She'll be raised properly, without your middle-class morality holding her back. Calvin stood slowly. I want to see the helicopter before tomorrow. Make sure it's safe for Emma. Anthony's eyes narrowed. Suspicious, aren't we? Careful, Calvin corrected. I'm a father first. I want to inspect the helicopter. Tonight. The Thorntons exchanged glances. Anthony shrugged. Fine. Marcus will take you to the hangar. He's piloting tomorrow anyway. See for yourself. It's perfectly safe. Calvin nodded and left the study, his mind already 3 steps ahead. They'd confirmed the method, the helicopter. They'd confirmed the intent, his death, possibly Emma's. They'd confirmed they saw him as a threat to be eliminated. What they hadn't confirmed was his own preparation. At the private hangar 30 minutes later, Calvin found the sleek black helicopter gleaming under industrial lights. And, standing beside it, doing a pre-flight check, was Marcus Hood. Marcus looked every inch the professional pilot and security contractor. Buzz-cut, aviator sunglasses despite the indoor setting, broad shoulders filling out his flight suit. He'd been Calvin's right hand in Afghanistan, the one person Calvin trusted absolutely. "Evening, sir," Marcus said formally for anyone listening. "Here to inspect the aircraft?" "That's right." Calvin walked around the helicopter, running his hands along the fuselage. To any observer, he was a concerned father checking safety. In reality, he and Marcus were confirming the final details of tomorrow's plan. Marcus opened the side door. "As you can see, all safety equipment is in place. Parachutes in the rear compartment." He paused meaningfully, though they'd be difficult for a civilian to access in an emergency. Calvin climbed inside, examining the interior. The passenger compartment was spacious, with facing bench seats and large sliding doors on each side. Easy enough to push someone out. His jaw tightened. "And the flight path?" Calvin asked. "Mr. Thornton wants to fly over the Hudson Valley. Beautiful views. We'll reach a cruising altitude of about 15,000 feet. Marcus handed him a tablet showing the route. "Weather's perfect tomorrow. Clear skies. 15,000 feet. Fatal altitude for a fall." Calvin studied the tablet, memorizing the route, then looked at Marcus. In his old friend's eyes, he saw grim determination. Marcus knew what was coming. They both did. "Looks good," Calvin said loudly. Then, dropping his voice to barely a whisper, "You're sure about the switch?" Marcus nodded fractionally. Dominic Strickland was supposed to pilot. "I convinced Anthony I was more qualified. Strickland's pissed, but he'll be on the ground." Dominic Strickland, the Thornton family's head of security, former mercenary, and according to Calvin's research, a man with 17 kills to his name, none of them sanctioned by any legitimate military. Of course, he'd been the original choice. "Thank you, brother," Calvin whispered. "Thank me when we're both on the ground alive," Marcus muttered back. Then, louder, "Any questions, sir?" "Just one." Calvin met his eyes. "If something goes wrong tomorrow, if they somehow push Emma and me out, what are our chances?" Marcus's expression didn't change. "From 15,000 feet? Without a parachute?" He paused. "Nobody survives that fall, sir. Nobody." Calvin nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." He left the hangar, got in his car, and drove not back to the Thornton estate, but to a storage unit 40 miles away. Inside, he'd spent the past 2 weeks assembling his insurance policy. 3 copies of the Thornton files, ready to be sent to the FBI, the DEA, and the Washington Post. 1 small, emergency parachute, civilian model, rated for low-altitude deployment, designed for base jumping. It wouldn't be comfortable at 15,000 feet, and using it would be dangerous as hell, but it was better than nothing. 1 specialized harness designed to secure an adult and small child together. 1 encrypted phone with pre-programmed messages ready to send. And 1 waterproof case containing medical supplies, his daughter's favorite stuffed rabbit, and a letter explaining everything, just in case. Calvin packed everything into a small backpack, slim enough to wear under a jacket. He practiced deploying the harness one more time, checking every strap, every buckle. Then he sat in the storage unit's harsh fluorescent light and thought about his daughter's laugh. Tomorrow, the Thorntons would try to kill them. Tomorrow, Calvin would let them think they'd succeeded. And then, when they thought themselves safe, he'd destroy them so completely they'd wish they'd never heard his name. He'd spent 8 years in intelligence learning to dismantle networks, expose secrets, and bring down criminals who thought themselves untouchable. The Thorntons were about to learn what happened when you threatened a father who knew how to fight back. Chapter 3, 15,000 feet. The morning dawned clear and cold, perfect flying weather. Calvin dressed Emma in warm layers, hiding the specialized child harness underneath her pink jacket. She didn't question it, too excited about the helicopter ride to notice the unusual clothing. Daddy, will we see clouds? Emma bounced on her feet. Maybe, sweetheart. We'll definitely see birds. Calvin zipped his own jacket, concealing the parachute pack. It was uncomfortable, bulky, but his outer jacket covered it well enough. To anyone watching, he just looked layered against the cold. Brittany appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Ready, ready, Calvin confirmed. The drive to the hangar was silent. Brittany stared out the window, occasionally checking her phone. Emma chattered about clouds and birds and whether they'd see her school from the sky. Calvin memorized every detail of his daughter's face, every inflection of her voice. At the hangar, Anthony and Kimberly waited beside the helicopter. Marcus stood by the pilot's door, professional and silent. Dominic Strickland lurked nearby, his face twisted with barely concealed anger at being replaced. Calvin, Emma. Anthony's smile was all teeth. Ready for the adventure of a lifetime? You have no idea how right you are, Calvin thought, but smiled back. Absolutely. They boarded, Anthony and Kimberly on one bench, Calvin and Emma facing them. Brittany slid the door closed and sat beside her parents. The seating arrangement was strategic, Calvin noted. 3 Thorntons on one side, their 2 targets on the other. Maximum leverage for pushing them out. Marcus started the engine. The rotors began to spin, building to a deafening whine. Emma pressed against Calvin, half excited, half scared. He held her close, whispering reassurances. The helicopter lifted smoothly, rising above the hangar, above the trees, climbing into the crystalline morning sky. The Hudson Valley spread below them, forests ablaze with autumn color, the river winding like a silver ribbon, distant mountains purple against the horizon. Beautiful, isn't it? Anthony shouted over the engine noise. Breathtaking, Calvin agreed. They climbed higher. 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet, 12,000. Calvin felt the air thinning, felt Emma's grip tighten on his jacket. He checked his watch. They'd been airborne for 18 minutes. According to the flight plan, they should be nearing cruising altitude. 15,000 feet. Anthony's smile vanished. He reached under his seat and pulled out a pistol. Now, he roared. Everything happened in seconds. Kimberly grabbed Emma, trying to wrench her from Calvin's arms. Brittany lunged for the door release. The helicopter banked sharply, Marcus's signal. Calvin's training kicked in. He twisted, pulling Emma against his chest, activating the hidden harness clasps. They snapped together with satisfying clicks. Emma was now secured to him, unable to be separated. What? Kimberly stumbled back. Calvin hit Anthony's wrist, sending the gun skittering across the floor. Then he pulled Emma toward the still-closed door, deliberately putting himself in position. You want to do this? Calvin shouted. Let's do it. Brittany laughed, high and manic. She yanked the door open. Wind screamed into the cabin, violent and freezing. Say goodbye, Calvin. Anthony recovered the gun, his face purple with rage. Nobody survives a fall from 15,000 feet. He pointed the weapon at Calvin's chest, then pulled the trigger. Calvin challenged. For a moment, Anthony hesitated. Shooting was one thing, but they needed this to look like an accident. That hesitation was all Calvin needed. He lunged backward toward the open door. Emma clutched against him. Brittany grabbed his jacket, trying to push. Kimberly screamed, something lost in the wind. And Anthony fired. The bullet went wide, punching through the fuselage. And in that instant of chaos, Calvin felt hands, Brittany's hands, shoving him hard. They tumbled out of the helicopter. The world became a nightmare of spinning sky and plummeting earth. Wind tore at them with brutal force. Emma screamed against his chest. 15,000 feet below, the ground rushed up to meet them. Calvin fought for control, spreading his limbs, stabilizing their fall. He could see the helicopter above them, already shrinking. Through the open door, he glimpsed Brittany's face, laughing, triumphant. Splatter like the mistake you are. Her voice barely reached him, torn away by wind. 5 Mississippi, 6 Mississippi, 7 Mississippi. Calvin counted, waiting for the helicopter to gain distance, waiting for the right altitude. Emma's screams had faded to terrified whimpers. He held her tight, whispering prayers he'd forgotten he knew. 10 Mississippi. He pulled the ripcord. The parachute deployed with a violent jerk, nearly tearing them apart. But the harness held. Emma gasped as their fall slowed from fatal to merely dangerous. The ground was still coming fast, too fast. This wasn't a normal skydiving chute. It was an emergency base jumping rig designed for low-altitude deployment. At 15,000 feet, it was barely adequate. Calvin grabbed the steering toggles, aiming for a clearing he'd spotted during their endless fall. Trees rushed past, getting closer. He could see individual leaves now, branches, the glint of a stream. They hit the tree canopy at 20 miles per hour. Branches clawed at them, tearing clothes, scraping skin. Calvin wrapped himself around Emma, taking the impacts. They crashed through 2 layers of branches before the parachute snagged on a massive oak. They jerked to a stop, hanging 30 feet above the ground. For a long moment, Calvin just breathed. Emma was crying, but alive. He was bleeding from a dozen cuts, but alive. They were alive. "It's okay, baby," he gasped. "We're okay. Daddy's got you." He looked up. Through gaps in the canopy, he could see the helicopter circling back, coming lower. They'd seen the parachute. They knew. Good, Calvin thought grimly. Let them come closer. Let them see. Marcus brought the helicopter to a hover above the trees. Calvin could see faces in the open door. Anthony's shock, Kimberly's horror, and Brittany. Brittany screamed because she just recognized the pilot. Marcus Hood, Calvin's friend, his brother from the Army, the man who'd been briefed on every detail of Calvin's plan, gave her a small salute. Then he banked the helicopter away, heading not back to the Thornton hangar, but to a private airfield 40 miles north, where FBI agents were already waiting with warrants. In the helicopter, the Thorntons would be trapped. Their pilot was now their captor. And in approximately 7 hours, when paramedics reached Calvin and Emma's position, exactly as planned, using the GPS tracker in Calvin's phone, the authorities would find 2 survivors with one hell of a story to tell. Calvin used his remaining strength to lower them safely to the ground using the parachute lines. Emma was sobbing, but unharmed beyond bruises and scratches. He held her close, checking her over, thanking every deity he could name that she was alive. His phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Package delivered. Birds in cage. Your move, brother. Calvin allowed himself a small smile. The Thorntons thought they'd won. They'd spent the flight back to that airfield laughing about his death, about how they'd spin the tragic accident, about how Brittany would collect the life insurance. Right up until Marcus landed at an FBI facility and agents swarmed the helicopter. Now came Phase 2, the complete and total destruction of everything the Thorntons had built. Calvin had 7 hours to rest, to hold his daughter, to gather his strength. Because when those paramedics arrived and the media storm began, he'd need to be ready for the performance of his lifetime. The Thorntons had pushed him out of a helicopter at 15,000 feet. They were about to learn that some falls are survivable, and some mistakes are fatal. Chapter 4. The Survivor's Tale. 7 hours later, as planned, paramedics hiked into the woods, following the GPS coordinates from Calvin's emergency beacon. They found him conscious, bleeding from multiple lacerations, holding his daughter, who'd somehow escaped serious injury. The scene was perfect, dramatic, sympathetic, undeniable. The media exploded. By the time Calvin was loaded into the ambulance, news helicopters circled overhead. By the time he reached the hospital, reporters packed the parking lot. And by the time FBI agents arrived to take his statement, the story had gone national. War hero survives murder attempt by billionaire in-laws. Documentary filmmaker and daughter pushed from helicopter at 15,000 feet. Thornton family arrested after failed murder for hire. Calvin spent 3 days in the hospital, mostly for observation. Emma stayed with him, sleeping in his bed, refusing to leave his side. Child psychologists came and went, concerned about trauma. But Emma was resilient, and she'd been unconscious for most of the fall, Calvin's body shielding her from the worst of it. During those 3 days, Calvin gave carefully crafted statements to law enforcement. He showed them the copies he'd made of the Thornton files, evidence of drug trafficking, money laundering, connections to cartels in 3 countries. He explained his discovery, his fear, the threats made in Antony's study. But he didn't tell them everything. Some cards he kept close to his chest. On the 4th day, his lawyer and old college friend Hayden Ray arrived, a sharp-dressed man with wire-rimmed glasses and a photographic memory that had made him a legend in Manhattan legal circles. "You magnificent bastard," Hayden said, closing the hospital room door behind him. "You actually did it." "Did what?" Calvin asked innocently. Emma was napping. Finally, curled up with her stuffed rabbit. "Survived. Got evidence. Got them arrested. Got national attention. Got." Hayden pulled out his tablet. 17 interview requests from major networks, 43 from newspapers and magazines, and a book deal offer for mid-7 figures. Not interested in any of it. "I figured." Hayden sat down, his expression turning serious. "Calvin, what you did was insane. You let them push you out of a helicopter. Had to make it real. Had to make sure they couldn't claim it was staged or fabricated. You could have died, but I didn't." Calvin looked at his sleeping daughter. "And now they can't hurt us anymore. The FBI has them on attempted murder, drug trafficking, and about 15 other charges. The DA thinks he can get life sentences for all 3. Hayden paused. "But here's the thing. Their lawyers are already working damage control. The Thorntons have money, connections, and the best legal team money can buy." "Not good enough," Calvin said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I mean prison isn't enough." Calvin turned to face his friend. "I want them destroyed, Hayden. Completely. Their business, their reputation, their legacy. I want it all turned to ash." Hayden studied him carefully. "What did you have in mind? The files I gave the FBI? Those are just the tip. I have more. Much more." Calvin pulled out a USB drive from under his pillow. Financial records going back 20 years. Communications with cartel leaders. Videos of meetings. And most importantly, evidence of who else is involved. Who? Judges. Politicians. Police chiefs. The Thorntons bought themselves a protection network. That's how they've operated for decades. Calvin's voice was cold. "I'm going to expose all of it. Every corrupt official, every paid-off cop, every politician in their pocket. By the time I'm done, the Thornton name will be synonymous with organized crime." Hayden whistled low. That's nuclear, Calvin. They tried to murder my daughter." "Fair point." Hayden took the USB drive. "What do you need from me?" "2 things. First, keep the FBI and media off my back while I recover. I need time to work." "Done." "And second, help me contact Elsa Shaw." Hayden's eyes widened. Elsa Shaw was an investigative journalist with the New York Times, famous for her Pulitzer-winning expose that had brought down 3 senators and a Fortune 500 CEO. She was relentless, thorough, and absolutely incorruptible. "You want to go public with everything." "I want to bury them so deep they'll never see daylight again," Calvin confirmed. "Can you reach her? For a story like this?" "She'll be on the next plane." Hayden was right. Elsa Shaw arrived the next morning. A woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair, sharp brown eyes, and a recording device that was never off. She listened to Calvin's story for 4 hours straight, occasionally asking clarifying questions, taking notes with the speed of a court stenographer. "This is extraordinary," she said finally. "If even half of this checks out, it's the biggest story of the decade." "All of it checks out," Calvin assured her. "I spent 3 months verifying everything before I made my move." "Your move?" Elsa smiled slightly. "You let them try to kill you to prove their intent. I needed them to commit, to show their true nature. Otherwise, it's my word against a wealthy family's lawyers. You're either brilliant or insane. Both, probably." Calvin poured her more coffee. "Can you run the story?" "Not just one story. This is a series. Minimum 6 articles, probably more. I'll need time to investigate, verify sources, contact the people named in these files for comment." "How long?" 3 weeks. Maybe 4. "Make it 3, Calvin said. "The Thorntons' lawyers are already building their defense. I want your story to drop right before their preliminary hearing." Elsa's smile widened. "Maximum impact." "I like it." She stood, gathering her materials. "One question, though. Why go through me? Why not just hand everything to the FBI and let them handle it?" Because the FBI will prosecute the Thorntons for specific crimes. But you, Calvin met her eyes. You'll destroy their entire legacy. You'll make sure everyone knows what they really are. Prison eventually ends. Public disgrace is forever. You're more ruthless than I expected from a documentary filmmaker. I learned from the best, Calvin said quietly. During my intelligence days, I watched how we destroyed terrorist networks. You don't just arrest the leaders. You dismantle the infrastructure, expose the collaborators, destroy the narrative. The Thorntons are a criminal network. I'm going to dismantle them the same way. Elsa nodded slowly. 3 weeks. I'll have a story ready. After she left, Calvin picked up Emma and carried her to the window. The media circus was still outside, but hospital security kept them at bay. His phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, social media mentions, messages of support. Hayden, Dominic Strickland, just made bail. Thought you should know. Calvin's jaw tightened. Dominic Strickland, the Thornton family's enforcer, the man who'd been supposed to pilot the helicopter, the man with 17 kills to his name. He'd been arrested as an accessory to attempted murder, but with the Thornton lawyers fighting hard in creative bail arguments, a judge had let him out, which meant Calvin had a new problem. Strickland was dangerous, loyal to the Thorntons, and now had every reason to want revenge. Calvin put security on Emma and me. Now, Hayden, already done. Former Secret Service, best in the business. They're outside your room right now. Calvin relaxed slightly. He'd anticipated this, planned for it, but knowing Strickland was out there, hunting made his skin crawl. His phone buzzed again, Marcus Hood this time. Marcus, heard Strickland made bail. Wanting to handle it? Calvin, no. Legal only. We're not criminals. Marcus, your call, but watch your back. Strickland's not the type to forgive and forget. Calvin knew, which is why he'd already set his next trap. Chapter 5. The Enforcer's Mistake. Dominic Strickland was many things, killer, mercenary, thug, but he wasn't stupid. He knew Calvin Payne had orchestrated everything, from the file theft to the helicopter setup. And he knew that unless he acted fast, the Thorntons would go down and take him with them. Calvin learned of Strickland's intentions from a surprising source. Nellie Kerr, the Thorntons' former housekeeper, who'd been quietly documenting the family's crimes for 3 years and had finally found the courage to come forward. Mr. Strickland came to the house yesterday, Nellie told Calvin during a secret meeting arranged by Hayden. He was shouting at Mrs. Thornton, said the only way to fix this was to eliminate the witness. He meant you. Calvin absorbed this information calmly. What did Brittany say? She told him to wait. Said they had lawyers working on it. Nellie twisted her hands nervously. But Mr. Strickland, he's not the waiting type. I heard him on the phone after. He was hiring people. Professional people. Assassins. Yes. Nellie's voice dropped to a whisper. He said he'd have it done within a week. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Calvin thanked Nellie and sent her to FBI protection. Then he made a phone call to an old intelligence contact named Wallace Moore, now a private investigator specializing in surveillance and counter-surveillance. I need eyes on Dominic Strickland, Calvin explained. Round the clock. I need to know everyone he meets, everything he does. Expensive, Wallace warned. I can afford it. The Thorntons' attempt on his life had actually improved Calvin's financial situation. His documentary work was suddenly in high demand. He had book deals pending, and a GoFundMe, started by supporters, had raised $300,000 for Emma's future. Dark irony. Wallace worked fast. Within 48 hours, Calvin had detailed reports. Strickland had indeed hired 2 men, Lupe Montez and Clyde Lambert, both former cartel enforcers now freelancing in the murder-for-hire business. They were planning to hit Calvin at his temporary apartment in 3 days, making it look like a home invasion. Perfect, Calvin said, studying the surveillance photos. Here's what I need you to do. Instead of warning the police, Calvin set a different trap. He leaked through anonymous channels that he'd be transferring certain sensitive documents to the FBI on the night of the planned hit. Documents that would allegedly implicate even more Thornton associates, including several dirty cops who'd been helping them. The leak was intentional bait. If Strickland thought Calvin had evidence that could bring down corrupt law enforcement, he'd have no choice but to accelerate the timeline and try to steal the documents. Calvin wasn't at the apartment the night of the hit. Neither was Emma. They were safely in FBI protective custody. But the apartment wasn't empty. Inside, waiting in the dark, was an FBI strike team that had been very interested to hear about a murder-for-hire plot involving 2 known cartel associates and a man already on bail for attempted murder. When Montez and Lambert kicked in the door, they walked into a wall of federal agents with guns drawn and cameras rolling. And Strickland, who'd been foolish enough to meet them nearby to coordinate the hit, was arrested 2 blocks away with incriminating texts on his phone and a bag containing $50,000 in cash, the first half of the payment. The arrests made national news. More importantly, they destroyed the Thorntons' remaining credibility. Their lawyers' claims that the helicopter incident was a tragic misunderstanding became laughably impossible to sustain when their head of security was caught hiring hitmen to finish the job. Checkmate, Hayden said, watching the news coverage in Calvin's new secure apartment. Strickland just buried them. Not yet, Calvin said. But soon. In jail, Dominic Strickland realized he was facing life imprisonment. His loyalty to the Thorntons lasted approximately 48 hours before he started talking to prosecutors, offering testimony in exchange for a plea deal. The stories he told were damning. Murders ordered by Anthony, bribes paid by Kimberly, drug shipments personally overseen by Brittany. He provided dates, locations, witnesses. He corroborated everything in Calvin's files and added new details prosecutors hadn't known. The DA's case went from strong to ironclad. But Calvin wasn't satisfied with just a criminal conviction. He wanted total annihilation. Chapter 6, The Empire Falls. 3 weeks after the helicopter incident, Elsa Shaw's first article dropped in the New York Times. The Thornton Files, How the Pharmaceutical Empire Hid a Drug Cartel. The article was devastating. Meticulously researched, carefully sourced, and absolutely damning. Elsa had verified every claim, contacted every person named, and built an irrefutable case that the Thornton family had been running drugs through their pharmaceutical company for over 2 decades. But that was just part 1. Part 2 ran the next day. Bought Justice. The Thornton family's web of corruption. This one named names. Judges. Politicians. Police chiefs. Elsa had used Calvin's files plus her own investigation to map the entire protection network. She showed bank transfers, recorded conversations, emails discussing arrangements. She showed how the Thorntons had systematically corrupted an entire region's justice system. By part 3, heads were rolling. Judges resigned. 2 politicians announced they wouldn't seek re-election. A police chief was arrested. The governor ordered a comprehensive investigation. By part 5, Thornton Industries' stock had collapsed. Major investors fled. Business partners terminated contracts. Banks called them loans. By part 6, the final installment, the Thornton name was synonymous with corruption, organized crime, and murderous greed. Calvin watched the empire fall from his new apartment, Emma playing with blocks at his feet. His phone rang constantly. Interview requests, movie offers, publishers wanting his story. He ignored most of it. "Daddy, can we go to the park?" Emma asked, holding up a toy airplane. "Soon, sweetheart. Very soon." Because Calvin had one final move to make. Chapter 7, The Gathering Storm. The preliminary hearing for the Thorntons was scheduled for late November, exactly 6 weeks after they'd pushed Calvin from a helicopter. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Attempted murder, drug trafficking, money laundering, witness tampering, and conspiracy charges that carried cumulative sentences of over 200 years. But Calvin knew wealthy people rarely faced the full weight of justice. The Thorntons still had money, lots of it, hidden in offshore accounts and shell companies. They had connections. They had lawyers working every angle, looking for technicalities, filing motions, trying to get evidence suppressed. So Calvin prepared to testify, not just about the helicopter, that was obvious, but about everything he discovered. Every document, every shipping manifest, every coded conversation he'd decrypted during his 3 months of investigation. The day before the hearing, Calvin received an unexpected visitor at his apartment. Kimberly Thornton's younger sister, Brooke Sutton, a woman who'd spent her life in her sister's shadow and apparently had had enough. "I need to tell you something," Brooke said, her hands shaking as she held a cup of tea. "About Emma." Calvin's blood ran cold. "What about Emma?" "Brittany. She's not Emma's biological mother." The words hung in the air like a bomb. Calvin stared at her, processing. "What?" "Brittany can't have children. Endometriosis, severe. She had a hysterectomy at 25. Brooke looked miserable. When she married you and you started talking about kids, the family panicked. They needed you to stay. You were their perfect cover. So they arranged an alternative." "Arrange how?" "Surrogate. A woman they paid, someone desperate for money. She carried Emma, gave birth, signed away all rights. Brittany faked the pregnancy with padding and careful scheduling. You were away filming a documentary during the crucial months. They planned it that way." Calvin felt like he'd been punched. "Emma's not. Brittany never. She's her daughter," Brooke said quickly. "Biologically yours. They just used someone else to carry her. But Brittany has legal documentation claiming she gave birth. It's all forged, of course, but very good forgeries." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Brittany's lawyers are planning to use Emma as leverage." Brooke pulled out her phone, showing him screenshots of text messages. "If the criminal case goes badly, they'll file for custody. Claim you're an unfit father, psychologically damaged from your military service, paranoid, dangerous. They'll use Emma as a bargaining chip, custody in exchange for reduced charges." Calvin's hands balled into fists. "They wouldn't dare." "They would. They will. Unless you stop them first." Brooke leaned forward. "The surrogate's name is Lakeisha Chase. She's still alive, still in the city. If you can get her to testify about the arrangement, about the forgeries, you can preempt their custody move and prove the Thorntons were willing to commit fraud even in their own family." Calvin sat back, his mind racing. This was unexpected, a new front in the war, but also an opportunity. If he could prove the Thorntons had forged birth documents, it would demonstrate a pattern of deception that would destroy any remaining credibility they had with the jury. "Where can I find Lakeisha Chase?" Brooke gave him an address in Queens. "She's scared. The Thorntons paid her well, made her sign NDAs with severe penalties. But maybe if she knows what they try to do to you and Emma, she'll reconsider." The next morning, Calvin and Hayden drove to Queens. Lakeisha Chase lived in a modest apartment building, working as a nurse. She answered the door cautiously, her eyes widening when she saw Calvin. "I know who you are," she said. "I've been watching the news." "Then you know they tried to kill me and Emma," Calvin said quietly. "The little girl you carried. The child you helped bring into this world." Lakeisha's face crumpled. "I didn't know they were like that. I swear. They seem like a nice family, just having fertility issues. They paid me $60,000. I needed that money. My mother's medical bills were drowning me." "I understand," Calvin said gently. "And I'm not here to blame you. But I need your help. The Thorntons are going to try to take Emma from me. I need you to testify about the arrangement, about the forged documents. They'll sue me for breach of contract. Let them try. You were part of a conspiracy to commit fraud. But if you cooperate with authorities, the DA will give you immunity. I've already talked to them." Hayden pulled out paperwork. "Sign this, and you're protected." Lakeisha read through the documents, tears streaming down her face. "Is Emma okay? After the helicopter?" "She's fine. Resilient. Beautiful." Calvin pulled out his phone, showing a recent photo of Emma laughing. "She's the best thing that ever happened to me. She kicked constantly. I used to talk to her, tell her she was going to have a good life." Lakeisha wiped her eyes. "I'll testify. Those people don't deserve her." Chapter 8. The Trial of the Century. The preliminary hearing became a media circus. Cameras packed the courthouse. Reporters fought for seats. The Thorntons arrived in designer suits, their expressions carefully neutral, their lawyers radiating expensive confidence. Calvin arrived with Emma, Hayden, and an entourage of supporters. Marcus Hood, Elsa Shaw, Nellie Kerr, Brooke Sutton, and Lakeisha Chase. A family not of blood, but of shared purpose. The prosecution presented its case over 3 days. Evidence of the drug trafficking. Recordings of threats. Dominic Strickland's testimony. Marcus Hood's account of the helicopter flight. Medical records showing Calvin and Emma's injuries. It was damning, overwhelming, irrefutable. Then the defense took its turn. The Thorntons' lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Heather Morales, tried to paint Calvin as a paranoid ex-soldier with PTSD who'd misinterpreted business dealings and family tensions. She suggested the helicopter incident was an accident, that Antony's gun had discharged during turbulence. Then in the chaos, Calvin had fallen with Emma. And we're supposed to believe, she said dramatically, that Mr. Payne just happened to have a parachute hidden under his jacket? That this was all some elaborate setup? Objection, the prosecutor said. Is counsel testifying? Sustained. But the seed of doubt was planted. Maybe Calvin had engineered everything. Maybe he was the real villain. Then Lakeisha Chase took the stand. She testified about the surrogacy arrangement, about Brittany's deception, about forged birth certificates and NDAs. She showed texts from Kimberly Thornton discussing how to manage Calvin if he ever learned the truth. The defense tried to attack her credibility, but she held firm. And when the prosecution entered the forged birth certificates into evidence, showing clear signs of tampering and backdating, the courtroom erupted. The Thorntons, the prosecutor said in closing, are a family built on lies. They lied about their business. They lied about their daughter. They lied about everything. And when Calvin Payne discovered the truth, they tried to silence him permanently. Justice demands they face the full consequences of their crimes. The judge ruled there was sufficient evidence for trial on all counts. Bail was revoked. The Thorntons were remanded into custody. As they were led away in handcuffs, Brittany turned to look at Calvin one last time. Her expression was pure hatred. "You ruined us," she hissed. "No," Calvin said calmly. "You ruined yourselves. I just made sure everyone knew." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Calvin made a brief statement. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about truth. The Thorntons spent decades hiding who they really were, hurting people in service of their greed. Today, the truth won. Emma and I can finally be safe. Chapter 9. Ashes and Renewal. The trial took place over 6 weeks in early spring. By then, the Thorntons' empire had completely collapsed. Thornton Industries declared bankruptcy. Their properties were seized and auctioned. Their bank accounts were frozen. Everything they'd built turned to ash. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Guilty on all counts. Antony Thornton, life imprisonment without parole. Kimberly Thornton, 40 years. Brittany Thornton, 50 years, with possibility of parole after 30. Calvin wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read. He was at the park with Emma, pushing her on the swings, watching her laugh as she flew higher and higher. "Higher, Daddy. I'm flying." "Just like a bird," Calvin agreed, smiling. His phone buzzed with texts from Hayden, Elsa, Marcus, all confirming the verdicts, congratulating him, celebrating the victory. Calvin read them later, after Emma had worn herself out and fallen asleep in his arms on the walk home. Justice felt different than he'd expected. Not triumphant or exhilarating. Just quiet, settled, done. That evening, Calvin sat in his apartment. Not temporary anymore, but permanent. His home. He'd bought it with the advance from his book deal, working title, 15,000 feet, and furnished it carefully. Emma's room was bright yellow, filled with books and toys. His office had a view of the city skyline. On his desk sat 3 items: a Purple Heart from his Army days, a framed photo of Emma, and a small piece of twisted metal from the helicopter, salvaged from the FBI evidence locker, a reminder of what he'd survived. Marcus Hood stopped by for dinner, bringing pizza and beer. They ate while Emma watched cartoons, talked about nothing important, enjoyed the simple peace of survival. "You did it," Marcus said finally. "Took down one of the most powerful criminal families in the country." "We did it," Calvin corrected. "Couldn't have done it without you piloting that helicopter. Easiest flight of my career. Just had to not throw you out the door." Marcus grinned, then grew serious. "But really, Calvin, what you did, letting them push you out, trusting a parachute to save you and Emma, that was insane. It was necessary. They had to commit, had to show their true nature." Calvin took a long drink of beer. "And I had to know I'd do anything to protect my daughter. Mission accomplished, brother. After Marcus left, Calvin tucked Emma into bed. She was clutching her stuffed rabbit, the same one that had been in the waterproof case during their fall. "Daddy, are we safe now?" she asked sleepily. "We're safe, sweetheart. Nobody's going to hurt us." "Good." She yawned. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Emma Bear." More than anything. He watched her sleep for a long time, thinking about everything they'd survived. The betrayal, the fall, the trial, the rebuilding. 3 months later, Calvin's documentary about the Thornton family premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. It was his most personal work yet. Part investigation, part memoir, part warning about how corruption hides behind respectable facades. The film won the Grand Jury Prize and was later picked up by a major streaming platform. Elsa Shaw's book about the case became a bestseller. Hayden Ray founded a victims advocacy group helping families targeted by organized crime. Nellie Kerr wrote a memoir about her years working for the Thorntons, donating proceeds to charity. Brooke Sutton became a foster parent, giving other children the safety her sister had denied them. And Lakeisha Chase stayed in touch with Calvin, becoming a kind of aunt to Emma, the woman who'd carried her, sending birthday cards and occasional visits, their complicated relationship evolving into something resembling family. On the 1-year anniversary of the helicopter incident, Calvin and Emma returned to the woods where they'd landed. The tree that had caught their parachute still stood, a massive oak bearing small scars from their impact. "This is where we fell," Emma asked, looking up at the branches. "This is where we landed," Calvin corrected gently. "Where we survived. Were you scared?" "Terrified, but I knew I had to protect you." That was all that mattered. Emma hugged his leg. "You're a good daddy." Calvin picked her up, holding her close. "You're a great daughter." They stood in the forest for a while, sunlight filtering through leaves, birds singing overhead. Then they walked back to the car, back to their life, back to the future the Thorntons had tried to steal. Behind them, the tree stood sentinel, a monument to survival, to love, to the lengths a father would go to protect his child. At 15,000 feet, the Thorntons had been certain they'd won. They'd been certain Calvin and Emma would splatter, becoming just another tragic accident that would be forgotten in weeks. Instead, they'd fallen, and in falling they'd flown. And the Thorntons? They were exactly where Calvin had promised they'd be, destroyed so completely that their name would forever be synonymous with evil, greed, and the terrible price of underestimating a father's love. Justice, Calvin had learned, wasn't always delivered by courts and juries. Sometimes justice was a parachute hidden beneath a jacket, a loyal friend at the helicopter controls, and a willingness to fall 15,000 feet to prove the truth. Sometimes justice looked like a father and daughter walking out of the woods alive, while their would-be murderers spent the rest of their lives in cages, their empire reduced to ash, their legacy nothing but a cautionary tale. Sometimes justice was simply surviving and making damn sure the world knew who the real monsters were. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Homecoming. The C-130 transport plane touched down at Fort Bragg with a mechanical groan that Andy Williamson had heard countless times over his 20-year military career. But this time was different. This was his final deployment, his last mission before retirement. At 42, Master Sergeant Andy Williamson was finally coming home for good. Andy had spent the better part of 2 decades serving his country in some of the world's most dangerous places. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, wherever Uncle Sam needed a man who could think fast, shoot straight, and lead others through hell. His weathered face bore the scars of shrapnel from an IED blast in Kandahar, and his steel-gray eyes had seen things that would break lesser men. But Andy wasn't a lesser man. He was a survivor, a strategist, and above all, a man who understood that loyalty was everything. The deployment had been brutal. 8 months in a classified location where the sun burned like a furnace and every shadow could hide death. But he'd endured it all with one thought keeping him sane: coming home to his wife Dana and their 18-year-old daughter Katie. Katie was graduating from high school today, and he'd moved heaven and earth to ensure his deployment ended in time for her ceremony. As he shouldered his duffel bag and walked across the tarmac, Andy felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. No more midnight raids, no more watching his back for insurgents, no more sleeping with one eye open. He was done. Time to be a husband and father again. The drive from Fort Bragg to their home in Fayetteville took 40 minutes, and Andy spent every second planning. He'd surprise them at Katie's graduation. Dana would be shocked to see him a day early, and Katie would finally have her father there for the most important day of her young life. He'd already arranged for flowers to be delivered to the ceremony. White roses for Katie, her favorite. Andy had met Dana Holloway 15 years ago at a military function. She was 25, beautiful in that Southern Belle way, with honey blonde hair and green eyes that could stop traffic. He was a young sergeant then, cocky and full of ambition. Dana worked as a real estate agent and seemed to understand the demands of military life. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within 6 months they were married. Katie came along 2 years later, and Andy thought his life was complete. The little girl with her mother's blonde hair and his determined chin became the center of his universe. Even when deployments took him away for months at a time, he carried her picture everywhere and called home whenever possible. But military life was hard on families. Andy knew the statistics. Divorce rates among military couples were astronomical. He'd seen good men come home to empty houses and custody battles. He'd always told himself his family was different. Dana understood his duty, his commitment to serving something bigger than himself. They were solid. As he pulled into their driveway, Andy noticed several cars he didn't recognize, probably relatives gathering before the graduation ceremony. He smiled, thinking how perfect the timing was. He'd walk in and surprise everyone. The house was quiet as he used his key to enter through the front door. His dress uniform hung pristine in the bedroom closet. He'd had it pressed before deploying specifically for this day. As he changed into it, Andy felt proud. 20 years of service, numerous commendations, the respect of his peers. Katie would be proud to have him there in uniform. His phone buzzed just as he was adjusting his ribbons. Dana's name appeared on the screen. Perfect timing. "Hey, beautiful," Andy answered, his voice warm with anticipation. "Guess where I am?" The voice that came through the phone was cold, sharp, and filled with something that made Andy's blood freeze. "Don't you dare show up at that graduation in that stupid uniform," Dana hissed. "Katie doesn't want to see you. None of us do. You've been gone so long, you're basically a stranger. Stay away from our family." Andy felt the world tilt. The words hit him like physical blows. "Dana, what are you? You heard me. Don't embarrass us by showing up. Katie specifically said she doesn't want you there. Find somewhere else to go." For a moment, Andy couldn't speak. 20 years of marriage, 18 years of being Katie's father, and this was his homecoming? The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of his heart breaking. Finally, Andy spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, the same tone he'd used when calling in airstrikes on enemy positions. "No problem." He hung up and sat heavily on the bed, staring at his reflection in the dresser mirror. The man looking back at him was a stranger, older, harder, with eyes that had seen too much. But Dana was wrong about one thing. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was something far more dangerous, a soldier with nothing left to lose. Andy pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for: Frankie Sanchez. Frankie was his old team leader, a man who'd left the military 5 years ago and now ran a successful security consulting firm. More importantly, Frankie owed Andy his life from an incident in Fallujah that they'd never spoken about afterward. "Frankie," Andy said when his friend answered. "It's Andy. I need a favor. The big kind. Andy, brother. Thought you were still deployed. What do you need?" "Information. Complete surveillance package on Dana Williamson and anyone she's been spending time with. I need to know everything. Where she goes, who she sees, what she does when she thinks no one's watching." "And Frankie?" I need it yesterday. There was a pause. Frankie knew better than to ask questions when Andy used that tone. Consider it done. I'll have my best people on it within the hour. Andy, you okay, man? I'm about to be. Andy hung up and began methodically removing his dress uniform. Each ribbon, each insignia carefully placed in its case. 20 years of service, 20 years of honor and sacrifice. And for what? To come home to betrayal? As he changed into civilian clothes, Andy's mind was already working, planning, strategizing. He'd learned long ago that emotional decisions led to dead soldiers. Cold calculation kept you alive and helped you win. And Andy Williamson had never lost a war. He walked to his study and pulled out a leather portfolio he'd kept locked away for years. Inside were documents, contacts, and resources most civilians couldn't imagine. Assets from his years in special operations, favors owed, networks of people who could make things happen or make things disappear. Andy sat at his desk and began making a list. By the time the sun set on Katie's graduation day, he would know exactly what he was dealing with, and then he would plan accordingly. Because Andy Williamson didn't forgive. He didn't forget, and he never, ever lost. Chapter 2. The Discovery. 23 missed calls. Andy stared at his phone display, watching the voicemails pile up like artillery shells. Dana's name dominated the screen, but there were others too, numbers he didn't recognize, including one labeled Rivers Law Firm. It had been 12 hours since he'd made the call to Frankie. 12 hours since he'd spoken those two simple words, no problem. Now his phone was exploding with desperate attempts to reach him, and Andy finally understood why. The first voicemail was from Dana, her voice no longer cold, but panicked. Andy, please call me back. We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. The second was more frantic. Andy, where are you? I've been calling all night. Katie's asking about you. By the 10th message, Dana was crying. By the 20th, she was begging. But it was the message from Stan Rivers, attorney at law, that made Andy smile for the first time in 24 hours. Mr. Williamson, this is Stan Rivers representing your wife. Please contact my office immediately. There are urgent matters we need to discuss regarding asset protection and other concerns. Time is of the essence. Andy deleted all the messages without listening to the rest and made himself coffee. Real coffee, not the bitter swill they serve in the field. As he sat at his kitchen table, he spread out the files Frankie had delivered at dawn. The surveillance photos told a story that made Andy's jaw clench. Dana wasn't alone in any of them. The man with her was tall, well-dressed, and handsome in a way that suggested he'd never worked a day of hard labor in his life. The timestamps showed a pattern going back over a year. Lunches that ran late into the afternoon, evening meetings at upscale hotels, weekend trips when Andy was deployed. The man's name was Mitch Head, and his background check revealed exactly what Andy had expected. 38 years old, divorced real estate developer who specialized in luxury properties. Clean credit, no criminal record, and a reputation for charming wealthy women. He'd been married twice before, both marriages ending when he moved on to more profitable opportunities. The financial records Frankie had obtained through less than legal means painted an even uglier picture. Dana had been siphoning money from their joint accounts for months, hiding it in accounts that bore only her name. She'd also been using their home equity line of credit for what appeared to be vacations and expensive gifts, items Andy had never seen. But it was the recorded conversations that truly opened Andy's eyes to the depth of the betrayal. He'll never leave the military. Dana's voice was clear through the surveillance equipment Frankie's team had planted. He's too much a Boy Scout. But after this deployment, he'll be eligible for retirement. That's when we make our move. Mitch's voice was smooth, confident. And you're sure he doesn't suspect anything? Please. Andy's so focused on duty and honor, he'd never think to look. Besides, Katie's almost 18. Once she graduates, we can push him out completely. He'll be devastated about losing his daughter, and he'll just disappear. Probably re-enlist or something. What about the house? The assets? Already handled. I've been moving everything into my name gradually. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to stop us. My lawyer says. Andy had heard enough. He closed the file and leaned back in his chair, processing the magnitude of their betrayal. They hadn't just been having an affair, they'd been planning to destroy him completely, to take everything he'd worked for and leave him with nothing. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated who they were dealing with. Andy opened his laptop and began researching. Mitch's head might look clean on the surface, but every man had secrets, and Andy knew how to find them. Within 2 hours, he'd uncovered the truth about Mitch's business practices. The man wasn't just a real estate developer. He was a predator who specialized in identifying vulnerable women with assets, seducing them, and then systematically draining their resources before moving on to the next target. Dana wasn't his first married victim, and she wouldn't be his last. The pattern was always the same. Charm the wife while the husband was distracted or absent. Convince her that she deserved better, that her current life was holding her back. Help her hide assets for her protection. Then, once the divorce was finalized and he'd gained access to half the marital property, he'd disappear with everything, leaving the woman devastated and broke. And he found court records from 3 previous cases. Each time, Mitch had walked away clean while his victims were left with nothing. The system protected men like him, smart enough to stay within the legal boundaries, charming enough to convince others he was the victim when things went wrong. But Andy wasn't the system. He was something far more dangerous. His phone rang, interrupting his research. Katie's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, Andy hesitated. His daughter had been turned against him, poisoned by her mother's lies. But she was still his little girl. "Dad." Katie's voice was small, uncertain. "Mom said you were back, but that you didn't want to see me. Is that true?" And he closed his eyes, feeling rage build in his chest like a nuclear reactor approaching critical mass. "Katie, sweetheart, that's not true. I came home specifically for your graduation. I wanted nothing more than to be there with you. But Mom said, your mother said a lot of things, honey, but I need you to listen to me very carefully. I love you more than anything in this world. That will never change, no matter what anyone tells you. Do you understand?" There was silence on the other end, then the sound of crying. "I don't understand what's happening, Dad. Everything's been so weird lately. Mom's been acting strange, and there's this man who's been coming around." "What man, Katie?" "His name is Mitch something. Mom says he's helping with the house or something, but he's always here when you're gone. And yesterday, I heard them talking about you not coming back." Andy's grip on the phone tightened. "Katie, I need you to listen to me. Can you get away from the house today? Maybe go to your friend Cindy's." "I guess so." "Why?" "Because some things are about to change, and I don't want you to be caught in the middle. Can you do that for me?" "Dad, you're scaring me." "Don't be scared, sweetheart. Just remember that I love you, and no matter what happens, that will never change. Can you promise me you'll stay away from the house tonight?" "Okay, Dad, I promise." After Katie hung up, Andy sat in the silence of his kitchen, surrounded by evidence of the most profound betrayal he'd ever experienced. His wife had sold him out for a smooth-talking con man. His daughter had been poisoned against him. Everything he'd fought for, everything he'd sacrificed for, had been systematically dismantled while he was serving his country. But Dana and Mitch had made one fatal error in their calculations. They thought they were dealing with a simple soldier, a man bound by rules and honor and conventional thinking. They were wrong. Andy Williamson had spent 20 years learning how to identify targets, how to plan operations, and how to execute missions with surgical precision. He'd been trained by the best military minds in the world to think like a weapon, to be patient, to strike when the enemy least expected it. Dana and Mitch had just declared war on the wrong man. Andy picked up his phone and began making calls. Not to lawyers or counselors or any of the conventional resources a normal husband might use. Instead, he called numbers that didn't appear in any directory, spoke to people who operated in the shadows between legal and illegal, between justice and revenge. By sunset, Andy had assembled a team. By midnight, he would begin the most important mission of his career, the mission to destroy anyone who had betrayed him. Chapter 3. The Setup. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Fayetteville had been empty for 3 years, a casualty of the recession that had hit the area hard. To most people, it was just another eyesore. To Andy Williamson, it was the perfect command center. He arrived at 0600 hours, just as the sun was painting the sky blood red. Frankie Sanchez was already there, along with 3 other men Andy recognized from the old days. They were the kind of soldiers who didn't exist on paper anymore, operators who'd done the jobs that governments denied and civilians couldn't imagine. "Hell of a setup you've got here," said Harvey McLean, a massive man with arms like tree trunks and scars that told stories he'd never share. Harvey had been Andy's demolitions expert in Afghanistan, a man who could make a building collapse with surgical precision or level a city block if the situation called for it. "Reminds me of that op in Damascus," added Devin Griffith, unpacking electronic equipment from a steel case. Devin was pure genius when it came to surveillance and electronic warfare. If it had wires, circuits, or transmitted a signal, Devin could control it, crack it, or make it disappear entirely. The 4th man was Owen Downs, and his presence made Andy's plan exponentially more dangerous. Owen didn't look like much. Average height, thinning hair, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him. But Owen was a cleaner, a man who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. Andy had called him last, and only after much consideration. "So," Frankie said, setting up a tactical planning board, "what's the target package?" Andy spread the surveillance photos across a folding table. "Dana Williamson, my wife. And this piece of shit." He tapped Mitch Head's photo hard enough to leave a fingerprint. "They've been planning to destroy me for over a year. Stealing money, poisoning my daughter against me, preparing to take everything I've worked for. Divorce lawyers getting expensive these days?" Harvey asked with a dark chuckle. "This isn't about divorce," Andy said, his voice dropping to the tone that had made enemy fighters surrender rather than face him in combat. "This is about consequences. These people think they can betray someone like me and walk away clean. They're wrong." He pulled out a detailed map of Fayetteville and began placing markers. "Mitch Head lives in a Meadowbrook development, big house on Riverside Drive. Dana will be there with him tonight. Our surveillance confirms they've been meeting there 3 times a week while I was deployed." "What's the objective?" Devin asked, already mentally cataloging the electronic warfare possibilities. "Total destruction," Andy said simply. "I want their lives dismantled piece by piece. Their reputations, their finances, their relationships, their sense of security. I want them to understand what it feels like to lose everything." Owen spoke for the first time, his voice quiet and professional. "How permanent are we talking?" And he met his eyes. "That depends on how well they learn their lesson." For the next hour, Andy laid out his plan. It was complex, multifaceted, and designed to hit every aspect of his target's lives simultaneously. Phase 1 would be psychological, making them understand they were being watched, that their secrets were no longer safe. Phase 2 would be financial, destroying their ability to profit from their betrayal. Phase 3 would depend on how they responded to the first 2 phases. "Devin, I need you to get into all their electronic communications. Every phone call, every text message, every email. I want to know what they're planning before they know it themselves." "Easy enough. Give me 48 hours. "Harvey, I need you to handle the physical security at both locations. Nothing that could hurt innocent people, but I want them to feel vulnerable in their own homes." "Roger that." Subtle intimidation or full psychological warfare? Start subtle. We can escalate if necessary. "Frankie, you're coordinating surveillance. I want to know everywhere they go, everyone they see, every conversation they have. My people are already in position." "Owen," Andy paused, looking at the cleaner. "I need you on standby, just in case things go sideways." Owen nodded without expression. In their world, backup plans often involved making problems disappear permanently. "What about the daughter?" Frankie asked. "Katie, right?" Andy's expression softened for just a moment. "She's off limits. Completely. She's been manipulated by her mother, but she's still my little girl. Anyone who touches her answers to me personally." The team spent the rest of the morning going over technical details, contingency plans, and escape routes. These men had worked together in situations where failure meant death, and they operated with the kind of precision that only came from absolute trust. At 1,400 hours, Andy's phone rang. Dana's name appeared on the screen, and he gestured for silence before answering. Hello, Dana. Andy, thank God. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for hours. Her voice was strained, desperate in a way Andy had never heard before. I've been busy. What do you need? We need to talk. There's been a terrible misunderstanding about yesterday. I was upset about other things, and I took it out on you. It wasn't fair. Andy almost smiled. Frankie's preliminary surveillance had already rattled them. What kind of other things? Just stress. Work stuff. Look, can you meet me for dinner tonight? Somewhere quiet where we can talk. I don't think that's a good idea, Dana. You made your feelings pretty clear yesterday. Please, Andy. I know how this must look, but there are things you don't understand. Things I need to explain. Such as, there was a long pause. I can't discuss it over the phone. Meet me at Romano's at 7. Please. Andy looked around at his team, all of whom were listening to the conversation. Devin was already tracing the call, and Harvey was grinning like a shark who'd smell blood. All right, Andy said finally. Romano's at 7. But Dana, if this is some kind of game, if you're planning something, you should know that I'm not the same man who left for deployment. Prison changes people. Combat changes them more. He hung up before she could respond, leaving her to wonder what he meant by that cryptic comment. Nicely played, Frankie said. Plant the seed that you might be unstable. Make them nervous about what you're capable of. Who says I'm not? Andy replied, and the silence that followed was profound. The afternoon passed quickly as the team dispersed to their assignments. Devin disappeared with enough electronic equipment to outfit a small army. Harvey vanished like smoke, though Andy knew he was already scouting both target locations. Owen simply walked away without a word, becoming invisible in a way that only true professionals could manage. At 1800 hours, Andy returned to his house to prepare for dinner. The place felt different now, violated, contaminated by the knowledge of what had been happening while he was gone. He showered and dressed carefully, choosing clothes that would make him look like the conventional military husband Dana expected. But concealed beneath his jacket was a recording device, and in his pocket was a phone that would transmit everything directly to Devin's monitoring station. By the end of the evening, they would have enough evidence to destroy both Dana and Mitch in any court in the country. Assuming, of course, that Andy decided to let the courts handle it. Romano's restaurant was exactly the kind of place Dana would choose. Upscale enough to feel safe, public enough to prevent any dramatic confrontations. Andy arrived 5 minutes early and chose a table with clear sight lines to all exits, a habit that had kept him alive in a dozen foreign countries. Dana arrived precisely on time, and Andy had to admit she looked good. She'd chosen a dress that emphasized her figure without being obvious about it, and her makeup was flawless. She was pulling out all the stops, trying to remind him of what he'd be losing if he didn't play along with her plan. Andy, she said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. You look good. A little thin, maybe, but good. Deployment food will do that to you, Andy replied, standing to pull out her chair like the gentleman she expected him to be. They ordered drinks, wine for her, coffee for him, and made small talk about Katie's graduation, his travel home, the weather. Dana was working up to something, and Andy was content to let her take the lead. Andy, she said finally, reaching across the table to touch his hand. I owe you an apology. What I said yesterday was inexcusable. I was under a lot of stress, and I took it out on you. What kind of stress? Dana's smile flickered for just a moment. Work stress. Money stress. You know how it is when you're deployed. Everything falls on me. The house, Katie, all the decisions. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed. I see. And that justified telling me to stay away from my daughter's graduation. No, it didn't. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. But Andy, there are things happening that you don't know about. Things that affect all of us. Andy leaned back in his chair, studying his wife's face. Such as, I've been getting some financial advice. About our future, about retirement planning. The advisor suggested that we might need to make some changes to protect our assets. What kind of changes? Well, for instance, it might be better if some of our assets were in my name only. For tax reasons, and to protect them if something happened to you. Andy nodded as if this made perfect sense. This financial advisor, do I know him? Dana's cheeks flushed slightly. His name is Mitch Head. He specializes in military families. He understands the unique challenges we face. I'd like to meet him. Of course. In fact, he suggested that the three of us should sit down together soon. He has some ideas that could really benefit our family. Andy smiled, and for just a moment, Dana relaxed. She thought she was winning, thought she was successfully manipulating him into her trap. She had no idea that every word she'd spoken was being recorded, analyzed, and added to a growing file that would destroy her completely. That sounds great, Andy said, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, Dana agreed, clinking her wine glass against his cup. As they finished dinner, Andy's phone buzzed with a text from Devin. Phase 1 was complete. In the next 24 hours, Dana and Mitch would discover that their private conversations weren't private anymore. Their financial transactions were being monitored, and their carefully laid plans were about to become very public knowledge. Andy paid the check and walked Dana to her car, playing the role of the concerned husband perfectly. He kissed her goodnight and promised to call tomorrow about meeting with Mitch. But as he watched her drive away, Andy's expression shifted back to the cold, calculating look of a predator who'd just cornered his prey. The war had officially begun. Chapter 4, First Strike. The text message arrived at 0347 hours. Package delivered. Subjects are awake. Andy smiled in the darkness of his temporary command post. Harvey's first move had been subtle but effective. A brief power outage at Mitch Head's house, followed by the sound of someone testing doors and windows. Nothing criminal, nothing traceable, just enough to make two guilty people understand that they were no longer safe in their sanctuary. By 0600, Devin had intercepted 17 phone calls between Dana and Mitch, each more panicked than the last. Someone was outside my house last night. Mitch's voice was tight with fear on the recording. I heard footsteps, saw shadows. When I looked out, the street was empty, but I know someone was there. Maybe it was just... No, Dana, this isn't coincidence. Your husband comes back, and suddenly I'm being watched? He knows something, and he doesn't know anything. He's not smart enough to. Your husband is special forces, Dana. These people are trained to kill with their bare hands. What if he's planning something? Andy had to admire Mitch's intuition. The man was a predator himself, which made him more sensitive to being hunted. Unfortunately for him, that same predatory instinct had made him overconfident. At 0800, Andy walked into the offices of Rivers' law firm, the same legal practice that had left him a voicemail. The receptionist, a young woman named Sherry Morris, looked up with a professional smile. I'm here to see Stan Rivers, Andy said. Andy Williamson. The smile faltered. Mr. Williamson? Please have a seat. I'll let Mr. Rivers know you're here. Within 30 seconds, a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit appeared. Stan Rivers was exactly what Andy had expected. Mid-40s, soft around the middle, the kind of lawyer who specialized in separating military men from their assets. Mr. Williamson, thank you for coming in. I've been trying to reach you. I got a message. You said there were urgent matters to discuss. Rivers led Andy into a conference room and closed the door. Yes, well, your wife came to me with some concerns about asset protection. She seemed to think you might be unstable since returning from deployment. Unstable how? PTSD, anger management issues, that sort of thing. She was worried about her safety and wanted to ensure that the family assets were protected. Andy nodded thoughtfully. I see. And you agreed to help her? Well, yes. When a military spouse expresses concerns about domestic violence. Have there been any reports of domestic violence, Mr. Rivers? No, but any police reports? Hospital visits? Evidence of any kind that I've ever laid a hand on my wife? Rivers shifted uncomfortably. No, but these situations can escalate quickly. So you decided to help my wife steal my assets based on her word alone. Without investigating, without talking to me, without any evidence whatsoever. Mr. Williamson, I resent the implication. Andy leaned forward, and his voice dropped to a whisper that made Rivers's blood freeze. Mr. Rivers, I've spent 20 years serving my country. I've been shot, blown up, and decorated for valor under fire. I've never once struck my wife, threatened her, or given her any reason to fear for her safety. But you've chosen to help her commit what amounts to theft of marital assets based on nothing but her lies. Rivers was sweating now, If there's been a misunderstanding. Oh, there's definitely been a misunderstanding. You see, you thought you were dealing with some broken-down veteran who'd roll over and let you steal his life. You're wrong. Andy stood and placed a folder on the table. That's a complete financial analysis of every transaction my wife has made in the past year. Every hidden account, every asset transfer, every dollar she's stolen. Your fingerprints are all over the legal documents. Rivers opened the folder and went pale. How did you? I also have recordings of conversations between my wife and her lover discussing their plan to defraud me. Conversations where they specifically mention your cooperation in hiding assets. Mr. Williamson, I can explain. You can explain it to the North Carolina State Bar Association. I'll be filing complaints about your unethical conduct this afternoon. Andy headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Rivers? You might want to review your malpractice insurance. Something tells me you're going to need it. By 1,000 hours, Andy was parked across the street from Head Development Corporation, Mitch's real estate company. The building was modern glass and steel, the kind of flashy facade that impressed clients but cost a fortune to maintain. Through his binoculars, Andy could see Mitch pacing in his corner office, phone pressed to his ear. Andy's own phone buzzed with an update from Devin. Financial records show Head Development is leveraged to the hilt. Company's been operating on credit and investor funds for the past 6 months. One major deal falls through, and the whole thing collapses. Perfect. And he had been wondering how to hit Mitch where it would hurt most. Now he knew. At 11:30, Andy walked into the offices of Meadowbrook Planning Commission, where Mitch's latest development project was pending approval. The receptionist directed him to the office of Commissioner Vicky Lim, a stern-looking woman in her 50s. Commissioner Lim, I'm Andy Williamson. I believe you have a development proposal pending from Head Development Corporation. Yes, the Riverside Estates project. 30 luxury homes on the river. Are you a neighbor? Something like that. I wonder if you've had a chance to review Mr. Head's background thoroughly. The standard checks were done. Business license, financial statements, that sort of thing. And he placed another folder on her desk. You might want to look at this. It's a complete history of Mr. Head's previous developments, including the ones that were never completed, the investors who were defrauded, and the environmental violations that were covered up. Commissioner Lim opened the folder and began reading. Her expression grew more serious with each page. Where did you get this information? Public records, mostly. It just takes knowing where to look. Mr. Head has a pattern of starting projects, collecting investor money, and then disappearing when problems arise. The Riverside project will be no different. This is very concerning. If even half of this is true, it's all documented. But there's more. Andy pulled out a second folder. Environmental impact studies from the proposed site. Did you know there's an underground stream running directly through the property? And that building on it would violate 3 different EPA regulations. Commissioner Lim was now fully engaged, making notes as she read. Mr. Williamson, I think we need to call an emergency session to review this application. That would be appropriate. Of course, if word gets out that the commission is reconsidering the project, it might affect Mr. Head's ability to secure financing. Andy left the planning office with the satisfaction of knowing that Mitch's major source of income was about to evaporate. But he wasn't done yet. At 1,400 hours, Andy paid a visit to First National Bank, where Mitch held his primary business accounts. Andy had called ahead, using his military credentials and a few carefully placed references to arrange a meeting with the bank president, Tommy Roth. Mr. Williamson, it's an honor to meet you. Your service record is impressive. Thank you, Mr. Roth. I'm here about a potential fraud issue involving one of your commercial clients. Oh, Andy spread out financial documents on Roth's desk. Mitch Head has been using fraudulent income statements to secure loans. These documents show his real financial situation versus what he's reported to your bank. Roth studied the papers carefully. These discrepancies are significant. If this is accurate, Mr. Head has been in violation of his loan agreements for months. There's more. He's been using the funds to finance a personal lifestyle rather than the business development he claimed. That includes expensive trips, luxury purchases, and gifts for women he's been involved with. Including married women? Including my wife. Roth's expression hardened. First National had a reputation to maintain, and being associated with fraud and adultery was not good for business. Mr. Williamson, I'll need to verify this information, but if it's accurate, we'll be calling Mr. Head's loans immediately. I understand completely. Thank you for your time. By 1600 hours, Andy was back at his command post, reviewing the day's progress. In 8 hours, he had triggered investigations that would destroy Mitch's legal representation, his major development project, and his business financing. But the day's most important operation was still to come. At 1800, Dana would be meeting Mitch at his house for their regular rendezvous. They would be feeling desperate now, frightened by the previous night's events and panicked by the legal and financial problems that had suddenly materialized. Desperate people made mistakes, and Andy was counting on a very specific mistake. His phone buzzed with a text from Harvey. Subjects are meeting as predicted. Package is in position. Andy smiled. Phase 2 was about to begin. Chapter 5, The Trap. The surveillance footage was crystal clear. At exactly 1803 hours, Dana's BMW pulled into Mitch Head's driveway, and she practically ran to the front door. Her body language screamed panic, shoulders hunched, constantly looking over her shoulder, moving with the jerky urgency of someone who knew they were being hunted. From his position in the abandoned warehouse, Andy watched the feed from 6 different cameras that Devin had placed around Mitch's property. High-definition video, directional audio, thermal imaging. Nothing was left to chance. She's scared, Frankie observed, watching Dana disappear into the house. She should be, Andy replied, his voice carrying the cold satisfaction of a predator who'd successfully driven his prey exactly where he wanted them. Inside the house, the audio surveillance was picking up every word. This is insane, Mitch was saying, his usual confidence replaced by barely controlled fear. Someone's targeting us specifically. The bank called this morning talking about loan irregularities. The Planning Commission is reviewing my project, and my lawyer says he can't represent me anymore because of some ethical conflict. What do you mean, ethical conflict? Dana's voice was shrill. Stan Rivers says he can't represent both of us because Andy came to see him today. He had documents, Dana. Financial records, recordings, things that should have been impossible to get. There was a long pause, then Dana spoke in a whisper. How much does he know? Everything. He knows about us, about the money transfers, about the divorce plan. The question is what he's planning to do about it. Andy smiled grimly. What he was planning to do was far worse than anything they could imagine. On the monitor, Andy watched as Harvey's thermal signature approached the house from the rear. The big man moved like a ghost, despite his size, decades of covert operations having taught him how to navigate hostile territory without detection. Harvey's in position, Devin reported. All surveillance equipment is active, and the subjects are in the target zone. Execute Phase 2 Alpha, Andy ordered. What happened next was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Harvey began with something simple, the sound of someone walking on the roof. Not running, not trying to break in, just the steady, deliberate footsteps of someone who wanted to be heard. Inside the house, Dana and Mitch froze. What was that? Dana whispered. Chill. Mitch was moving toward the window, trying to see outside. There's someone up there. The footsteps stopped, and for 30 seconds there was silence. Then they resumed, this time moving from the roof to the side of the house, as if someone was climbing down. Call the police, Dana hissed. And tell them what? That my married girlfriend and I heard footsteps while we were planning to defraud her husband. Andy had to admire Mitch's tactical thinking, even while despising the man himself. Calling the police would create a record, questions that neither of them wanted to answer. Phase 2 Bravo began with the lights. Every light in the house went out simultaneously, plunging Dana and Mitch into total darkness. Emergency power kicked in 30 seconds later, but those 30 seconds were enough to send both targets into full panic mode. Someone cut the power, Mitch said, his voice tight with fear. This isn't random. Someone is specifically targeting us. It's Andy, Dana said, and for the first time she sounded absolutely certain. He knows. Oh God, he knows everything. Phase 2 Charlie was the most subtle and perhaps the most effective. Devin had hacked into Mitch's home security system, and now he began manipulating it in ways that would drive a guilty mind to paranoia. Motion sensors triggered at windows where no one was standing. Door sensors showed openings and closings that weren't happening. The security system's recorded voice announced front door open and rear door open and motion detected in master bedroom, in an endless cycle of false alerts. The system's malfunctioning, Mitch said, but his voice carried no conviction. Or someone's hacking it, Dana replied. Andy was always good with computers. Andy wasn't particularly good with computers, but he didn't need to be. He had Devin, and Devin was an artist. For 20 minutes, Harvey continued the psychological assault. Footsteps that started and stopped. Shadows that moved past windows. The sound of someone testing door handles, trying locks, tapping on glass. Never quite crossing the line into breaking and entering, but creating the overwhelming impression that the house was surrounded by hostile forces. Inside, Dana and Mitch were falling apart. "We have to call the police," Dana said again. "We can't. Don't you understand? If Andy has evidence of what we've been doing, if he has recordings, the police won't help us. They'll arrest us. Then what do? We run. Tonight. We take whatever money we can access and disappear." "What about Katie? What about her?" "She's 18, Dana. She's not a child anymore." Andy's hands clenched into fists. The casual way Mitch dismissed his daughter's importance revealed exactly what kind of man he was. Andy had known predators like this in war zones. Men who would use and discard anyone to save themselves. "We can't just abandon her," Dana said, though her voice lacked conviction. "She's not my problem. And if we stay, she'll have front row seats to watch us go to prison. Is that what you want?" There was a long silence, and when Dana spoke again, Andy heard something die in her voice. "How much money can we access tonight? Maybe 60,000 from my business accounts. Another 40 from your personal accounts. It's not much, but it's enough to disappear. Where would we go? I have contacts in Costa Rica. No extradition treaty, easy to buy new identities. We could be on a plane by morning." Andy had heard enough. His wife was planning to abandon their daughter and flee the country with a con man. Any lingering doubts about the righteousness of his mission evaporated completely. "Devin," he said quietly, "are you getting all this?" "Every word, boss. Digital recording, backed up to multiple servers." "Good." Harvey, begin Phase 3. Phase 3 was when Andy stopped playing games. The front door of Mitch's house opened with a soft click. Not violently, not dramatically, just opened, as if someone had used a key. "Did you hear that?" Dana's voice was barely a whisper. "The front door just opened," Mitch said, his voice cracking. "Someone's in the house." They could hear footsteps now, steady and deliberate, moving through the first floor. Not trying to be quiet, not sneaking, walking with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "Back door," Mitch hissed. "We go out the back door." They moved toward the rear of the house, but before they could reach the exit, the back door opened as well. More footsteps coming from that direction. "We're trapped," Dana said, and Andy could hear tears in her voice. "The garage," Mitch said. "We can get to the car through the garage." They moved toward the connecting door to the garage, but when Mitch tried the handle, it wouldn't turn. The lock had been engaged from the other side. "It's locked," he said, rattling the handle desperately. "That's impossible. It doesn't lock from the garage side." But it did now, thanks to Harvey's modifications. The footsteps were getting closer, coming from both directions. Dana and Mitch were trapped in the central part of the house with nowhere to run. "Please," Dana called out into the darkness. "Whoever you are, we can work this out. We can pay you." The footsteps stopped. "Andy," Dana tried again. "Andy, if that's you, please. Let's talk about this. I know you're angry, but we can fix this." Silence. Then, from speakers throughout the house, Andy's voice filled the air. Not live. This was a recording Devin had prepared, played through the home sound system. "Dana, Mitch, you've been very busy while I was gone. Andy, please. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was too stupid, too trusting, too broken down to see what you were doing?" Andy's recorded voice was calm, conversational, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. "I know about the affair. I know about the money you've stolen. I know about your plan to destroy me and take everything I've worked for. I know about your plan to abandon my daughter and flee the country. We can explain. You can explain it to the FBI. I've already provided them with complete evidence of your fraud, your theft, and your conspiracy. They'll be here in the morning. This was a lie. Andy hadn't contacted the FBI yet, but Dana and Mitch didn't know that. But that's tomorrow. The recording continued. Tonight, you belong to me. The lights went out again, but this time they didn't come back on. In the command center, Andy stood up. Harvey, Owen, time to go. Bring them to the warehouse. Alive? Owen asked. For now. Andy had spent weeks planning this moment, considering every angle, every possible outcome. Dana and Mitch had destroyed his family, stolen his money, and planned to abandon his daughter. They'd shown no remorse, no hesitation, no human decency. Now they would learn what happened when you betrayed Andy Williamson. The real lesson was about to begin. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. The warehouse was cold, echoing with the sound of metal chairs scraping against concrete as Harvey and Owen positioned their captives in the center of the empty space. Portable floodlights created a harsh circle of illumination, beyond which the shadows seemed to stretch into infinity. Dana and Mitch sat back to back, secured to their chairs with military-grade restraints. Neither was physically harmed. Andy had been very specific about that, but both were in a state of shock that bordered on catatonia. Andy emerged from the shadows, still wearing civilian clothes, but somehow looking more military than he had in his dress uniform. There was something in his posture, his movement, that spoke of violence held in careful check. Hello, Dana, he said conversationally. Mitch. Dana lifted her head, and Andy saw that she'd been crying. Andy, please. Whatever you think we've done, I don't think anything. I know exactly what you've done. Andy walked slowly around their chairs, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. The question is what to do about it. Look, man, Mitch said, trying to project confidence despite his situation. I don't know what Dana told you, but Andy stopped walking and stared at Mitch until the man's voice trailed off into silence. Mitch Head, 38 years old, divorced twice, 3 previous convictions for fraud, all plea bargained down to misdemeanors. Currently under investigation by the IRS for tax evasion. Mitch's face went pale. How do you? I know everything about you, Mitch, including the fact that Dana isn't your first married victim. You've been running this con for years. Find a military wife whose husband is deployed, seduce her, convince her to hide assets, then disappear with everything when the divorce is finalized. Andy pulled out a tablet and began reading from it. Sandra Morrison, divorced Marine captain, lost $300,000. Jennifer Walsh, divorced Army major, lost her house and custody of her children. Melissa Chun, divorced Air Force lieutenant colonel, lost everything and had a nervous breakdown. Each name hit Mitch like a physical blow. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Because I have bank records, hotel receipts, and recorded phone conversations that say otherwise. Andy set the tablet down and picked up a manila folder. But my favorite piece of evidence is this. A recording from 3 weeks ago where you and Dana discussed the best way to break me psychologically after the divorce. Something about making sure I'd be too devastated to fight back. He played a few seconds of audio, and Dana's voice filled the warehouse. If we can make him think Katie hates him, he'll just disappear. He's the type who'd rather suffer alone than fight for something that might hurt his daughter. Dana was sobbing now. I never meant for it to go this far. I was confused. I wasn't thinking clearly. You meant every word, Andy said coldly. You've been planning this for over a year. Moving money, manipulating Katie, preparing to destroy everything I've worked for. The money, we can give back. All of it. Can you give me back my daughter's respect? Can you give me back 20 years of trust? Can you give me back the pride I felt when I thought I was coming home to a family that loved me? Andy's voice never rose above conversational level, but something in his tone made both captives flinch. Here's what's going to happen, Andy continued. Mitch, you're going to confess to defrauding every woman you victimized. You're going to make restitution to each of them, and you're going to disappear from North Carolina forever. And if I refuse? Andy smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Owen, Show Mr. Head what happens to people who refuse. Owen stepped into the light, and Mitch saw him clearly for the first time. There was something about the man's face, his dead eyes, that spoke of violence as casual as breathing. I specialize in making problems disappear, Owen said quietly. Sometimes the problems are evidence. Sometimes they're witnesses. Sometimes they're people who refuse reasonable requests. Mitch swallowed hard. What? What kind of confession? Written, signed, witnessed, and notarized. Admitting to fraud, conspiracy, and conspiracy to commit adultery. With specific details about your methods and your other victims. That would destroy me legally. Yes, it would. But you'd be alive to face the consequences. Refuse, and I'll let Owen solve the problem his way. Mitch looked around the warehouse, taking in the isolation, the professional way he'd been captured, the obvious military precision of the operation. These weren't civilians playing games. These were men who'd done this sort of thing before in places where nobody would ever ask questions. I'll sign whatever you want, he said finally. Smart choice. Andy turned to Dana. Your situation is more complicated. Andy, I'm your wife, the mother of your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything? It meant everything, right up until you decided to throw it away for a con man and some stolen money. Andy pulled up another chair and sat facing her. For a moment, his expression softened, and Dana saw a glimpse of the man she'd married. Do you remember our wedding day? He asked. You promised to love me for better or worse, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. Do you remember that? Yes, Dana whispered. I kept those promises. Through 4 deployments, through months of separation, through the nightmares and the injuries and all the things that come with military life. I kept my promises. I know you did. And you threw them away the first time some smooth talker convinced you that you deserved better. Andy stood up and began pacing again. But here's the thing, Dana. I'm not just angry about the affair. People make mistakes. Marriages fail, it happens. What I can't forgive is what you did to Katie. I never hurt Katie. You turned her against me. You poisoned her mind, made her think I didn't want to be at her graduation, convinced her that I was abandoning the family. You used our daughter as a weapon against me. Dana was crying harder now. I was scared. I thought if you found out about Mitch. So you decided to destroy my relationship with my daughter to protect your affair. You were willing to sacrifice everything she and I had together to save yourself. Andy knelt down, so he was at eye level with Dana. That's unforgivable. A man can survive losing his wife. He can survive losing his money, his house, his pride. But you try to take away my daughter. That's where you cross a line you can never uncross. What are you going to do? Andy stood up and walked back into the shadows. When he returned, he was carrying a briefcase. You're going to sign divorce papers, giving me full custody of Katie and admitting to adultery and fraud. You're going to liquidate every asset you've hidden and return every penny you've stolen. You're going to disappear from Katie's life completely. I can't abandon my daughter. You already did. The moment you decided to flee the country with Mitch. The only question now is whether you disappear voluntarily or involuntarily. Dana looked around the warehouse, seeing the same things Mitch had seen. The isolation, the professional setup, the men who moved like predators. And if I sign, you get to live. You get a head start before I turn the evidence over to the authorities. You get a chance to disappear somewhere that doesn't have an extradition treaty. How long? 24 hours. Andy opened the briefcase and pulled out legal documents that had obviously been prepared in advance. Every detail had been considered, every contingency planned for. These papers transfer everything back to me. House, bank accounts, investments, everything. They also include a confession to adultery and fraud, witness statements about your affair with Mitch, and a voluntary relinquishment of all parental rights. I can't sign away my daughter. You already have. You just haven't made it legal yet. For 20 minutes, Dana tried to negotiate to find some middle ground that would let her keep some connection to Katie. But Andy was implacable. She'd crossed the line when she'd used Katie as a weapon, and there was no going back. Finally, with Owen's dead eyes watching her every move, Dana signed the papers. Mitch had signed his confession an hour earlier, admitting to running elaborate fraud schemes against military wives and providing specific details that would allow law enforcement to prosecute him successfully. Excellent, Andy said, collecting the documents. Harvey, take them back to Mitch's house. Leave them there. Don't let them communicate with anyone. Don't let them take anything but basic clothes and identification. What about cars, money, phones? They can have one car and whatever cash they have in their wallets. Nothing else. And he turned back to his captives. You have 24 hours before I turn this evidence over to the FBI, the IRS, and the North Carolina State Police. I suggest you use that time wisely. Where are we supposed to go? Dana asked. That's not my problem anymore. As Harvey and Owen prepared to transport Dana and Mitch back to Mitch's house, and he pulled out his phone and made a call. Katie, it's Dad. Can you meet me at the house tomorrow morning? There are some things we need to discuss. Is everything okay? Mom's been acting really weird lately, and she wasn't home last night. Everything's going to be fine, sweetheart. Better than fine. I'll explain everything tomorrow. After hanging up, Andy stood alone in the warehouse, surrounded by the evidence of his successful operation. In less than 72 hours, he'd identified his enemies, gathered intelligence, executed a complex plan, and achieved total victory. Dana and Mitch would disappear, probably to South America or somewhere equally remote. They'd spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, never knowing if tonight would be the night that Andy Williamson decided they'd learn enough. And Katie would finally learn the truth about what her mother had done and why her father had seemed to abandon her. Andy Williamson had served his country with honor for 20 years. Now he'd serve justice with the same dedication. The war was won. Chapter 7. The Truth. Katie Williamson sat at the kitchen table of her childhood home, staring at a stack of documents that had just destroyed everything she thought she knew about her life. Bank statements, surveillance photos, recorded conversations, legal papers, the complete evidence of her mother's betrayal laid out in chronological order. I don't understand, she said for the third time, her voice barely above a whisper. Mom said you didn't want to see me graduate. She said you were angry about something and that you might not come back from deployment. Andy sat across from his daughter, watching her process the magnitude of what she was learning. At 18, Katie had her mother's blonde hair and delicate features, but she had Andy's steel gray eyes and his stubborn jaw. Right now, those eyes were filling with tears as she realized how completely she'd been manipulated. Your mother lied to you, sweetheart, about everything. Katie picked up one of the surveillance photos, Dana and Mitch kissing outside an upscale hotel. How long has this been going on? Over a year, based on the evidence. Maybe longer. And you knew? When you came home, you already knew? I suspected something was wrong when your mother told me not to come to your graduation. I confirmed it within 12 hours. Katie was quiet for a long time, reading through bank statements that showed her mother systematically stealing money from joint accounts. She was planning to leave with him. Yes, and she was going to take me. Andy hesitated. This was the part he'd been dreading. Actually, sweetheart, she was planning to leave you behind. Katie looked up sharply. What? Andy played one of the recorded conversations from 2 nights ago. Dana's voice filled the kitchen. She's 18, Mitch. She's not a child anymore. She's not my problem. Katie listened to her mother casually discussing abandoning her, and something seemed to break inside her. The tears stopped, replaced by something harder. She was just going to leave me, she said flatly. I'm sorry, Katie. I know how much this hurts. Where is she now? Gone. She and Mitch left the country early this morning. Katie nodded, processing this information with a maturity that made Andy proud and sad at the same time. And you let them go. I gave them a choice. Face the legal consequences of what they'd done, or disappear forever. They chose to disappear. Will they ever come back? No. Katie was quiet for another long moment, then looked up at her father with an expression that reminded him powerfully of himself. Good. Andy was surprised by the venom in her voice. Katie, no, Dad. I'm done pretending this is some tragic misunderstanding. Mom didn't just cheat on you. She stole from us. She lied to me for over a year. She turned me against you and then planned to abandon me completely. Katie's voice was getting stronger, angrier. I don't want her to come back. I never want to see her again. Andy reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. It's okay to be angry, but don't let that anger poison you. Your mother made terrible choices, but she's still the woman who gave birth to you, who raised you, who lied to me every day for a year," Katie interrupted. "Who made me believe that you didn't love me anymore. Who almost made me miss having my father at my graduation because she was protecting her affair." Katie pulled her hand away and stood up, pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal. "You know what the worst part is? I actually felt sorry for her. When you were deployed, she'd cry and talk about how hard it was being alone, how much she missed you. And I'd comfort her. I'd tell her you'd be home soon, that everything would be okay. She was manipulating you. She was evil," Katie said with finality. "And I'm glad she's gone." Andy studied his daughter's face, seeing emotions there that no 18-year-old should have to feel. But he also saw strength, resilience, the kind of character that would help her survive this betrayal and emerge stronger. "What happens now?" Katie asked. "Now we rebuild. It's going to be just you and me for a while. What about college? Mom was supposed to help me with the applications, the financial aid forms. All taken care of. I've been managing our finances from deployment, and your college fund is intact. More than intact. Actually, since I recovered all the money your mother had stolen." Katie looked surprised. "How much did she take?" "About $80,000 over the past year." "Jesus." Katie sat back down heavily. She really was planning to destroy us completely, wasn't she? Yes, she was. They sat in silence for a while, both processing the magnitude of what had happened. Finally, Katie spoke. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "The way Mom and Mitch disappeared, did you hurt them?" Andy considered his answer carefully. "I made sure they understood the consequences of their actions. I made sure they knew that there would be no forgiveness, no second chances, no opportunity to hurt us again. But no, I didn't physically harm them. But you could have." "Yes." Katie nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd been thinking. "Good. I'm glad you're scary when you need to be." This wasn't the reaction Andy had expected. "Katie." "No, Dad, listen. I've been thinking about this since you showed me the evidence. Mom and Mitch were predators. They planned this whole thing, manipulated everyone around them, and we're going to destroy our family for money. Normal people don't do that. And normal responses don't work against people like that." Katie leaned forward, her gray eyes intense. "You fought back. You used your skills, your resources, your intelligence to protect us. You made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else the way they hurt us. That's not scary. That's justice." Andy felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. His daughter was showing remarkable strength, but he didn't want her to become as hard as he'd had to become. "Justice is important," he said carefully. "But so is knowing when to stop, when to show mercy." Did they show us mercy? Did they show mercy to Mitch's other victims? No, they didn't. Then they got exactly what they deserved. Katie stood up and began collecting the evidence files. "I want copies of all this." "Why?" "Because someday, when I'm older, when I have children of my own, I want to remember exactly what betrayal looks like. I want to remember what people are capable of when they think they can get away with it." She paused at the doorway. "And I want to remember what it looks like when someone fights back." After Katie went upstairs to her room, Andy sat alone in the kitchen, thinking about what his daughter had said. She was right about most of it. Dana and Mitch had been predators who deserved everything they'd gotten. But her response worried him. There was a hardness in her voice, a coldness in her eyes that reminded him too much of himself. His phone buzzed with a text from Frankie. "Package delivered. Subject are on a plane to Costa Rica. They won't be back." Andy deleted the message and went to his study, where he opened a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for his retirement. As he poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, he thought about the choices that had brought him to this point. He'd served his country with honor for 20 years. He'd been a good husband, a devoted father, a man who'd kept his promises even when keeping them cost him dearly. And his reward had been betrayal by the person he'd trusted most. But he'd won. Not just survived, not just escaped, won completely. His enemies were destroyed, his daughter was safe, and his future was secure. So why did victory taste so much like ashes? Because, Andy realized, some victories came at a cost that couldn't be measured in money or justice or revenge. Some victories changed you in ways that could never be undone. He'd protected his daughter from her mother's betrayal, But in doing so, he'd shown her a side of the world and a side of himself that no child should have to see. Andy finished his drink and went upstairs to check on Katie. She was at her desk, reading through the evidence files again, making notes in a notebook. "What are you writing?" he asked. "A timeline. I want to understand exactly when everything happened, when the lies started, why I should have known something was wrong." "Katie, you were 17 when this started. You had no way of knowing." "I should have seen it," she said firmly. "I should have questioned why Mom was suddenly so negative about you, why she kept making excuses for why you couldn't call more often, why she seemed so eager for me to make plans that didn't include you." Katie looked up at her father, and her expression was eerily mature. "I won't be fooled like that again. By anyone." Andy kissed the top of her head. "Get some sleep, sweetheart. Tomorrow we start over." "Dad, yes. I'm proud of you. For fighting back. For not letting them win." As Andy went to his own room, he carried Katie's words with him. His daughter was proud of him for being ruthless, for being unforgiving, for destroying people who'd betrayed him. She was becoming just like him, and Andy wasn't sure if that was something to celebrate or something to mourn. Chapter 8. Ghosts. 3 months after Dana and Mitch disappeared, Andy received a phone call that changed everything. He was in his study, reviewing college applications with Katie, when his secure phone, the one only his military contacts knew about, rang with a number he didn't recognize. "Andy Williamson." "Mr. Williamson, this is Special Agent Maribel Chapman, FBI. I need to speak with you about Dana Williamson and Mitch Head." Andy felt his blood turn to ice. "I'm sorry, who?" "Sir, we know they've left the country. We know you were involved in their departure. And we know there's more to this story than what's in the police reports. I have no idea what you're talking about. Mr. Williamson, I'm calling you as a courtesy because of your military service. But make no mistake, this is an official investigation. Can you meet me tomorrow morning?" After hanging up, Andy sat staring at the phone. He'd covered his tracks carefully, used professionals who knew how to operate without leaving evidence. But the FBI had resources that went beyond normal law enforcement. "Dad," Katie looked up from her college application. "Is everything okay?" "Just work stuff, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." But Andy was worried, very worried. The next morning, he met Special Agent Chapman at a coffee shop in downtown Fayetteville. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and the kind of bearing that suggested military background. "Army?" Andy asked as she sat down. "Marines. 8 years before law school." Chapman studied Andy's face. "Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and a few places that don't officially exist." They sized each other up like the veterans they were, each recognizing something familiar in the other. "Mr. Williamson, I'm going to be direct. 3 months ago, your wife and her lover disappeared without a trace. Before they left, someone systematically destroyed their financial, legal, and professional standing. Someone with access to military-grade surveillance equipment and personnel. Sounds like they made some powerful enemies." "Yes, they did. The question is whether those enemies broke any federal laws." And he leaned back in his chair. "Agent Chapman, my wife committed adultery and fraud. She stole money from our joint accounts and planned to abandon our daughter. If someone exposed her crimes and gave her a chance to face the consequences or leave voluntarily, that sounds like justice to me. It also sounds like vigilante action. And vigilante action, even against guilty parties, is still illegal. Do you have any evidence that I committed a crime?" Chapman opened a folder and spread out several documents. "We have evidence that someone conducted illegal surveillance, broke into private property, and possibly kidnapped 2 American citizens." "Kidnapped? That's a serious accusation." Mitch Head's neighbors reported seeing unmarked vehicles near his house the night he disappeared. His security system shows evidence of electronic tampering, and his housekeeper found signs that people had been held against their will in his garage. Andy studied the documents without touching them. Sounds like Mr. Head had more enemies than just cuckolded husbands. "Mr. Williamson, I know you have connections to people who specialize in off-the-books operations. I know you called in favors to make this happen. Even if that were true, which I'm not admitting, you'd have to prove it. And you'd have to convince a jury that the real criminals were the people who exposed fraud and adultery, not the people who committed it. Chapman closed the folder. You're right. The evidence is circumstantial, and frankly, Dana and Mitch aren't sympathetic victims. But there's something else. She pulled out another file, this one much thicker. Mitch Head was already under federal investigation for interstate fraud. We've been building a case against him for months. His disappearance destroyed 3 years of investigative work, and he felt the first real chill of fear. I'm sorry to hear that. He was going to flip, Mr. Williamson. We had enough evidence to put him away for 20 years, and he was going to give us his entire network. Names, locations, methods, bank accounts. We were about to break up one of the largest fraud rings targeting military families in the country. The coffee shop suddenly felt very quiet. Instead, Chapman continued, our primary target is hiding somewhere in Central America. Our investigation is ruined, and dozens of other victims will never get justice. And he met her eyes steadily. That's unfortunate, but it's not my problem. Isn't it? You're a career military man. You took an oath to protect and serve. Do you really feel good about letting dozens of other military families suffer because you wanted personal revenge? The words hit Andy like physical blows. He'd been so focused on protecting his own family, on getting justice for his own betrayal, that he'd never considered the bigger picture. How many other victims? He asked quietly. 43 that we know of. Maybe more. Mitch Head was part of a sophisticated operation that specifically targeted military wives during deployments. Your wife wasn't his first victim, and she wouldn't have been his last. Chapman leaned forward. Mr. Williamson, I understand why you did what you did. If someone had hurt my family the way they hurt yours, I might have done the same thing. But your actions have consequences beyond your personal situation. Andy was quiet for a long time, processing what he'd learned. What do you want from me? Information. Locations. Anything that might help us find Head and continue the investigation. I told you, I don't know where he is. But you know people who do. You know people who could find him. Andy considered this. Frankie's organization had resources that could track anyone, anywhere. But using those resources again would mean admitting to Chapman that he'd been involved in the original operation. Hypothetically, Andy said, if someone were to provide information about Head's location, what would happen to that someone? Hypothetically, if that someone were a decorated veteran who'd been the victim of fraud and adultery, and if that someone were to cooperate fully with our investigation, the Justice Department might be inclined to overlook certain irregularities in how the information was obtained. It was a deal. Immunity in exchange for cooperation. I need 24 hours, Andy said. You have 12. That afternoon, Andy called an emergency meeting with his team at the warehouse. When he explained the situation, the reactions were predictably mixed. This is why we don't leave loose ends, Owens said flatly. Should have solved the problem permanently from the beginning. The FBI agent is right, Frankie said. We focus on the personal betrayal and ignored the bigger picture. Head was part of something larger. So what's the play? Harvey asked, and he had been thinking about that question all afternoon. We give him Head, not Dana. She's Katie's mother, and despite everything, I won't be responsible for putting her in federal prison. But Head is a predator who's hurt dozens of families. He needs to face justice. And if Head tries to implicate us? Devin asked. He won't, because we're going to make sure he understands that cooperating with the FBI is his only chance of staying alive. It took Frankie's people 6 hours to locate Mitch Head. He was living in a beachfront condo in Costa Rica, apparently convinced that he'd successfully escaped justice. He had no idea that Andy Williamson's reach extended far beyond the borders of North Carolina. The extraction was simple and clean. Head was sedated, transported to a private airfield, and flown back to the United States in a corporate jet that existed only on paper. By the time he woke up, he was in federal custody in Quantico, Virginia. The FBI was impressed by the professionalism of the operation, though they asked no questions about methodology. Special Agent Chapman called Andy that evening. Mr. Head is being very cooperative. It seems someone convinced him that his best option was to tell us everything he knows. I'm glad to hear he's seeing reason. He's provided information about a network spanning 12 states and involving millions of dollars in fraud against military families. It's going to be the biggest bust of its kind in FBI history. In my situation, as far as the Bureau is concerned, you were the victim of a crime who provided valuable information to help us solve it. There are no charges pending, and none will be filed. After hanging up, Andy sat in his study, thinking about the conversation with Chapman and what it meant. He'd won his personal war against Dana and Mitch, but in doing so, he'd almost let a much larger evil escape justice. It was a reminder that even righteous anger could have unintended consequences, that personal revenge sometimes came at the cost of broader justice. Katie appeared in the doorway. "Dad, you look worried." "Just thinking about choices, sweetheart. And consequences." "The FBI agent called, didn't she?" Andy looked up sharply. "How did you?" "I saw the name on your phone when it rang. I looked her up online." Katie sat down across from her father. "She's investigating fraud against military families. Mom and Mitch were part of something bigger, weren't they?" There was no point in lying. Katie was too smart, and she'd already seen enough deception to last a lifetime. "Yes, they were. And when I made them disappear, I accidentally interfered with an FBI investigation. But you fixed it. You helped them catch the real bad guys." "Yes, I did. But I almost didn't. I was so focused on our situation that I almost let dozens of other families suffer." Katie was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "That's why justice has to be bigger than revenge." Andy looked at his daughter with surprise. "That's a very wise observation. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what you did, what Mom did, what it all means." Katie met her father's eyes. "I understand why you did what you did, and I'm still glad you fought back. But I also understand that being strong enough to fight means being wise enough to know when fighting isn't enough." As Andy tucked Katie into bed that night, he reflected on how much his daughter had grown in just 3 months. She'd seen betrayal, revenge, and justice up close, and somehow she'd emerged with a wisdom that most adults never achieved. Maybe that was the real victory. Not the destruction of his enemies, but the preservation of his daughter's moral compass despite everything she'd been through. The ghost of his choices would always be with him. But Katie would face her future with strength, wisdom, and the knowledge that sometimes fighting back was the only option. That was enough. Chapter 9. No Forgiveness. 1 year later, Andy Williamson stood at the graduation ceremony of the FBI National Academy, watching Special Agent Maribel Chapman receive an award for her work on the largest military family fraud case in Bureau history. The investigation had resulted in 47 arrests, the recovery of over $12 million in stolen assets, and the creation of new protocols for protecting military families from financial predators. Katie sat beside him, resplendent in her cap and gown. She'd graduated as valedictorian of her high school class and would be starting at West Point in the fall. The girl who'd been manipulated and nearly abandoned by her mother had transformed into a young woman of remarkable strength and purpose. "Proud of you, kiddo," Andy whispered as they watched Chapman's acceptance speech. "Proud of you too, Dad, for doing the right thing in the end." The right thing? Andy still wasn't sure he could claim that distinction. He'd destroyed his enemies utterly, shown no mercy, and nearly let a larger injustice continue unchecked. But he'd also protected his daughter, recovered their stolen money, and ultimately helped bring down a network of predators. After the ceremony, Chapman approached them in the parking lot. "Mr. Williamson, Katie, I wanted to thank you both again for your cooperation. Any word on the remaining suspects?" Andy asked. "We've arrested 34 of the 47 targets. The rest are in countries that don't extradite, but they'll never be able to return to the United States." "Including Dana?" Chapman's expression grew carefully neutral. Mrs. Williamson was never charged with federal crimes. Her involvement was limited to her relationship with Head, and since she left the country voluntarily, the Justice Department doesn't consider her a priority target. It was a polite way of saying that Dana would never face legal consequences for her betrayal. She would spend the rest of her life in exile, cut off from her daughter and everything she'd known, but she would never see the inside of a prison cell. Katie spoke for the first time since the ceremony. "What about the other women who were involved with these men?" The ones who helped them target military families. That's more complicated. Some were clearly victims who were manipulated. Others were willing participants. We're evaluating each case individually. After Chapman left, Andy and Katie drove home in comfortable silence. The house felt different now. Lighter somehow, as if the shadows of betrayal had finally been banished. As they pulled into the driveway, Katie spoke. "Dad, do you ever regret what you did?" Andy considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that your mother made the choices she made. But no, I don't regret fighting back. Even knowing what we know now, about the FBI investigation, about all the other victims, especially knowing that your mother and Mitch were predators, Katie. They would have continued destroying families if someone hadn't stopped them." Katie nodded. "Do you think Mom knows? About the arrest, about what happened to Mitch?" "I'm sure she does. It's been all over the news." "Do you think she regrets it? What she did to us?" Andy parked the car and turned to look at his daughter. "I think your mother regrets getting caught. I think she regrets losing everything she thought she was going to gain. But do I think she regrets betraying us? No, Katie, I don't think she does." "How can you be so sure?" "Because true remorse requires empathy. It requires understanding how your actions hurt other people. Your mother never showed any concern for how her betrayal affected you or me. She was only upset when she realized there would be consequences." Katie was quiet for a moment, then asked the question Andy had been dreading. "Do you think I'll ever see her again? Do you want to?" "No," Katie said without hesitation. "I just wondered if you'd try to stop me if I changed my mind." Andy shook his head. "You're 18 now, almost 19. You're an adult who can make her own decisions. But Katie, if you ever do decide to contact your mother, remember who she really is. Remember what she was willing to do to us. Don't let her manipulate you again." "I won't," Katie said with the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. "I know exactly who she is now, and I know who I am too." That evening, as Andy sat in his study, he received an encrypted email from an address he didn't recognize. When he opened it, he found a single photograph. Dana, sitting alone at a sidewalk cafe in what looked like a Central American city. She appeared older, worn down by exile and the constant fear of discovery. Her hair was different, her clothes were modest, and her eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd lost everything that mattered. There was no message, no explanation of who had sent the photo or why. But Andy understood. It was a reminder that his reach was still long, that even in exile, Dana was not beyond his influence. He deleted the email and the photograph without saving either. Dana Williamson was dead to him, as surely as if she'd been buried in the ground. The woman in the photo was just a stranger who happened to share her face. Andy's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Frankie. "Andy, just wanted to let you know, word came back from our contacts in Costa Rica. Had tried to escape federal custody during transport. Didn't make it." Andy was quiet for a moment. Tried to escape, or help to escape? Does it matter? Justice was served either way. After hanging up, Andy sat in the darkness of his study, thinking about justice and revenge and the thin line between them. Mitch Head was dead, killed while attempting to escape federal custody. The official report would show that he'd been shot by U.S. Marshals while trying to flee during a prisoner transport. The truth was probably more complicated, but Andy felt no guilt about Head's death. The man had been a predator who destroyed dozens of families and shown no remorse for his crimes. Whether he died during a legitimate escape attempt or been eliminated to prevent him from revealing inconvenient truths about his capture, the world was a better place without him. Some people deserve forgiveness. Some people deserve second chances. Mitch Head and Dana Williamson were not those people. A soft knock on the study door interrupted Andy's thoughts. Katie stood in the doorway, wearing pajamas and holding a cup of tea. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Just thinking." "Come in, sweetheart." Katie curled up in the leather chair across from his desk, tucking her feet under her like she used to do as a little girl. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think I'm too hard? Too unforgiving?" The question surprised Andy. "What makes you ask that?" "Some of my friends think I should try to contact Mom. They say family is family, that forgiveness is important, that holding grudges will hurt me more than it hurts her. What do you think?" "I think they don't understand what really happened." They think this was just a normal divorce where parents made mistakes. They don't understand that Mom was willing to destroy our family for money and abandon me completely. Katie sipped her tea, organizing her thoughts. I've been reading about forgiveness, about whether it's always necessary or always good. And I've decided that forgiveness has to be earned. It's not something you give away for free just because someone shares your DNA. That's a very mature perspective. I learned it from you. You showed me that some betrayals are unforgivable, that some people will take advantage of mercy and see it as weakness. Katie met her father's eyes. I'm not angry anymore, Dad. I don't hate Mom, but I don't forgive her either, and I never will. She made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. Andy felt a complicated mix of pride and sadness. His daughter had learned to be strong, to protect herself, to recognize betrayal and respond appropriately. But she'd also learned to be unforgiving, to write people off permanently, to see mercy as a luxury she couldn't afford. She'd become like him. Katie, I want you to promise me something. What? Promise me that you'll never let what happened with your mother make you afraid to trust people who deserve it. Promise me you won't let her betrayal turn you into someone who can't love fully because you're always watching for signs of deception. Katie considered this seriously. I promise I'll try. But Dad, I also promise that I'll never be a victim again. I'll never be manipulated or betrayed the way Mom tried to manipulate and betray us. That's fair. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, father and daughter, survivors of the same war. Outside, the North Carolina night was quiet and peaceful, giving no hint of the battles that had been fought and won within these walls. Finally, Katie stood up. I should get some sleep. Early morning tomorrow. Katie, yes. I'm proud of who you've become. Your mother's betrayal could have broken you, could have made you weak or bitter or afraid. Instead, it made you stronger. That's a rare gift. Katie smiled, and for a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to wait by the window for her father to come home from deployment. I had a good teacher, she said. After Katie went to bed, Andy remained in his study for another hour, thinking about forgiveness and justice and the prices both demanded. He'd chosen justice over mercy, strength over forgiveness, and he'd taught his daughter to make the same choice. It had saved them both, but it had also changed them.